Chosen one, I hear the Spirit laying something on my heart for you today. These are not my words alone. These are words that have been placed before me for the chosen ones who are meant to receive them in this hour. I speak them as a vessel, not as my own authority. And what I am about to share, I need you to receive carefully. Because April 15th, 16th, and 17th are not ordinary days. They are not dates I chose. They are not numbers selected for dramatic effect. These 3 days carry something written over them, something that was set in motion long before this moment, long before you arrived here. And the reason you are present right now, in this exact hour, is because you were meant to be. So before anything else, take a real breath, not a shallow one, a real one, the kind that reaches the bottom of your chest. Because what follows is not a casual message, it is not background noise. What I am about to walk you through was prepared for this window of time, for chosen ones who are standing at a threshold they can feel, but have not yet been given language for. That is who this is for. And if you are still here, that is you. Now, I want to locate you, not in a general way, in the specific way, because I know something about the season you have been in. I know what the last several months have felt like, not because I can see your circumstances, but because there is a pattern that every chosen one moving toward a divine window experiences, and it is not subtle when you know how to read it. It has been heavy, not the kind of heavy that comes from doing too much, the kind that comes from carrying something you cannot put down, a sense of something larger on the horizon that you cannot name, cannot fully explain, and cannot shake. A weight that lives not in your muscles, but somewhere deeper, in the part of you that knows things before they are proven. You have been waking up in the night, or if not waking, you have been moving through your days with a low-level alertness that does not turn off, as if some part of you is listening for something, waiting for a signal that has not yet arrived, and there has been grief in it. Not the grief of loss exactly, though there may have been loss. The grief of a promise that lives inside you, which has not yet opened into its fullness. The grief of a calling that is real and undeniable, and yet still, somehow, still waiting. The weight of a promise you cannot yet see fulfilled. The grief of a calling that has not opened into its fullness. The particular loneliness of knowing you carries something that most people around you cannot understand. That is not weakness. I need you to hear that clearly. That grief, that heaviness is not evidence that you were wrong about yourself. It is not evidence that the calling was imaginary. It is evidence of sensitivity. It is what it feels like to be a chosen one who is close to something without yet being able to touch it. And that brings me to the first thing I need to show you. Because your body and your spirit have been communicating with you about these 3 days, and most people have no framework for understanding what that communication looks like. So they dismiss it. They call it stress. They call it anxiety. They medicate the signal without ever reading the message. I am going to read it for you today. The first sign that a chosen one is standing at a divine threshold is a specific kind of anticipation that carries no clear object. You know what anticipation with an object feels like. You are waiting for a call, expecting news, counting down to something defined. This is different. This is anticipation without a name, a feeling that something is coming that you cannot identify. And it is mixed, and this is important. It is mixed with something that feels almost like dread. Not the dread of something bad, the dread of something large. The dread of a door that, once walked through, cannot be walked back through. The feeling of standing at the edge of something irreversible. If you have been feeling that, if there has been a low hum of something unnamed moving through your days, that is not anxiety disorder. That is your spirit recognizing that you are close to a Kairos moment. That is your inner perception, doing exactly what it was designed to do. The second sign is happening in your sleep. Your dreams have changed. Not necessarily the subjects, though those may have shifted too, but the texture, the clarity. They have become more vivid, more narrative, more purposeful. You wake from them with the feeling that something was being shown to you, even when you cannot hold on to the images by morning. Some of you have been dreaming about people you have not thought about in years. Some of you have been dreaming about places, unfamiliar places, that feel more like home than anywhere you have actually lived. Some of you have been dreaming about yourself, not the current version, but a version that moves with a confidence you have not yet found in waking life. That is not coincidence. When the spirit is preparing a chosen one for a threshold, the communication does not stop during sleep. In many ways, it intensifies. The walls between the seen and the unseen thin during rest. And what your waking mind would argue with, your sleeping mind can simply receive. Pay attention to what you have been dreaming. It is not random noise. It is instruction. The third sign is one that may have confused or even troubled you. Things that you used to tolerate, you no longer can. Conversations that used to feel fine now feel draining in a way that leaves you depleted for hours afterward. Environments that used to be neutral now feel oppressive. People who used to energize you have become, without any specific conflict, exhausting to be around. And you have probably felt guilty about this. You have probably questioned yourself, what is wrong with me? Why am I pulling away? Am I becoming cold? Am I becoming someone I do not want to be? I want to answer that question directly. Nothing is wrong with you. What is happening is an elevation in your spiritual sensitivity that is outpacing the environments and relationships that were calibrated for an older version of you. You are not becoming cold, you are becoming calibrated. The frequency you are operating at is rising, and what used to be compatible is no longer compatible. Not because those people or places are bad, but because you are being prepared for a different kind of company. The things that drain you are not your enemy, they are your compass. And here is what I need you to understand about all three of these signs: the unnamed anticipation, the vivid dreams, the changed tolerance. None of them are symptoms of something going wrong in your life. They are symptoms of something arriving. They are the internal weather pattern that precedes a divine window. And you are inside that weather pattern right now. Before I go further, and there is much further to go in this message, I want to tell you what is coming. Because what I am going to walk you through today is not a single revelation. It is a sequence of them, and each one builds on the last in a way that, by the time we reach the end, will reframe not just these 3 days, but the entire season that preceded them. Here is what this message carries for you. You are going to understand specifically why these 3 days carry the weight they carry. Not as vague spiritual language, but grounded in a pattern that has appeared across centuries of sacred history, in the lives of people who were chosen for something they could not yet see. You are going to receive a practical framework for how to move through April 15th, 16th, and 17th in a way that is aligned rather than reactive. You are going to understand the specific obstacle that is most likely to block chosen ones at this exact threshold and how to release it before it costs you what this window was designed to release. And at the end of this message, I am going to speak something specific over your life that I believe will stay with you long after you leave this space. Stay with me. Every word from this point forward was placed here for you. Now, I need to introduce you to something, because to understand what these 3 days mean, you first have to understand a distinction that most people have never been taught, even those who have walked a spiritual path for years. There are 2 kinds of time. The ancient Greeks understood this in a way that has been largely lost in the modern world. They had 2 separate words for time, 2 entirely different concepts that we collapse into one word, and in collapsing them, lose something essential. The first kind of time is Kronos. Kronos is the time you measure. It is the time on your phone. It is the calendar, the schedule, the sequence of minutes accumulating into hours, accumulating into years. Kronos is neutral. It does not favor you. It does not oppose you. It simply passes. April 15th in Kronos. Time is just a Tuesday, in the middle of a month, in the middle of a year. But there is a second kind of time. The second kind is Kairos. Kairos does not tick. Kairos does not accumulate. Kairos arrives. It is the appointed time, the moment that was designated. the threshold that exists not because the calendar placed it there, but because something in the structure of your story made it inevitable. Kairos is the time that changes things. And here is what I need you to understand. Most people move through their entire lives in Kronos. They experience day following day, year following year, and they wonder why nothing seems to shift. They pray, they try, they wait, and they do not understand that the lack of movement is not a failure of faith or effort. It is a failure of perception. They are measuring everything in Kronos and missing the Kairos moments entirely. Because Kairos does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with visible ceremony. It arrives as an ordinary day, April 15th, a Tuesday that carries within it a weight that Kronos cannot measure. And the difference between the chosen ones who walk through their Kairos windows and the ones who miss them is not worthiness, it is awareness. You are here because you were meant to be aware. And that awareness is going to be the difference between what the next chapter of your life looks like and what it could have looked like. But here is what I need you to understand about Kairos. And this is the piece that most teaching on divine timing leaves out. Kairos moments do not arrive without preparation. The window does not open to an unprepared soul. And what looks like the delay in your life, the long waiting, the slow seasons, the years of faithfulness that seem to produce nothing visible, those were not punishment. Those were not God's absence. Those were the preparation for this window. Every month of silence, every answered prayer that did not come in the form you expected, every moment you showed up and nothing seemed to change, every season where you kept moving without evidence. Those were not wasted. They were the architecture of what these 3 days are designed to release. But this is only the surface of what I want to show you. Because the question you may still be holding, the question that is absolutely right to hold, is why these 3 days specifically? Why April 15th, 16th and 17th? Why this pattern? Why this window? That answer is in the history of every chosen one who has ever faced a moment like this. And it is in a pattern so consistent, so ancient, so clearly the signature of the divine that when you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. That is where we go next. Gently press the like on this message, not for me, but so it can reach another chosen one who is standing at the same threshold tonight and does not yet have language for what they are feeling. Now let me show you the pattern. 3 is not a coincidence in sacred language. It never has been. Before you can fully receive what God has said about April 15th, 16th, and 17th, you need to carry something into that understanding. You need to carry the weight of what 3 days has meant across the entire arc of sacred history. Because when you hold that knowledge, these dates stop being 3 squares on a calendar. They become a map. The pattern of 3 days is not decoration. It is the divine signature. It is the way that heaven has always moved through a specific window of time that holds more transformative weight than the days on either side of it. 3 days of darkness before the dawn. 3 days of silence before the voice breaks through. 3 days of what looks entirely like an ending before everything that was promised becomes undeniably, irreversibly real. This is not a formula that humans invented. This is a pattern that heaven laid down, and I'm going to show it to you through 3 chosen ones who lived it before you. The first is Joseph. You may know the broad strokes of his story. Favored son, coat of many colors, brothers who hated what he carried, thrown into a pit, sold, taken far from everything familiar. Years and years and years of circumstances that looked nothing like the dream that had been placed inside him. But there is a moment in Joseph's story that most people skim past. Before his elevation, before Pharaoh's dream, before the palace and the position and the vindication that finally came, there was a pit. And in that pit, in that dungeon, in that holding pattern, Joseph spent 3 days. 3 days of total darkness. 3 days of no visible movement. 3 days where, from the outside, it looked like the story was over. And then the window opened. Not randomly, not because circumstances finally cooperated, because the 3 days of formation, the 3 days of being held in the threshold were complete. What was being built in those days could not be built faster. The preparation required exactly as long as it took. And when the door opened, Joseph walked through it as a man who could carry what was on the other side. He could not have carried it before the pit. The pit was not punishment. The pit was the making. The second is Esther. Esther's story is one of the most precise examples of Kairos in all of sacred literature. A young woman, positioned without knowing why, placed in proximity to power she did not seek, living in a palace that was not her home, carrying an identity she was instructed to conceal. And then the moment comes. The Kairos arrives. And Mordecai says to her those words that have echoed across centuries: for such a time as this, not for such a time as last year, not for such a time as 5 years from now, when you feel more prepared and more confident and more certain of your footing. For such a time as this. The specificity is the point. Kairos is always specific. It does not arrive for a general category of chosen ones. It arrives for this one, in this place, at this moment, carrying exactly what was formed in them during the years of being hidden. Esther could not have stood in the king's court before she had been through what she had been through. The years of formation, the loss, the displacement, the quietness, the discipline of living in a space that was not yet hers. All of it was required for the specific moment when her presence in that court was the difference between life and death. She did not choose the Kairos. The Kairos chose her. And then she had 3 days. 3 days of fasting. 3 days of preparation. 3 days of aligning everything inside her before she walked through the door that could not be walked back through. 3 days later, she stepped into her assignment. The third pattern I need to show you appears in the most well-known 3-day story in sacred history. I will not dwell long here, because the symbol is one most of you already carry. 3 days in the tomb. 3 days where everything that had been proclaimed seemed entirely undone. 3 days where the ones who had believed found themselves in a grief so complete, so total, that the word hope would have been an insult. And then, day 3. Not day 2. Not a week later, when the shock had worn off. Day 3. The timing was not incidental. The 3 days were not a bureaucratic delay. They were the structure of the revelation. The very darkness of those 3 days was what made the light of the third day carry the weight it carried. You cannot have the resurrection without the tomb. You cannot have the breakthrough without the 3 days. This is the pattern. 3 days. Every time. Not as coincidence, as design. 3 days before Joseph walked into his elevation. 3 days before Esther walked into her assignment. 3 days before the greatest reversal in sacred history became undeniable. And now I am going to tell you something. You are not outside this pattern. You are inside it. What has felt like abandonment was actually appointment. What has felt like silence was actually strategy. What has felt like stagnation was actually incubation. What has felt like the end of the road was actually the turning of it. You have been in the 3 days. And I need to say something here that I have been carrying since the beginning of this message, something I promised to return to. There is a dimension of this preparation that most spiritual teaching does not address. Because most spiritual teaching speaks to the soul and leaves the neuroscience of perception entirely out of the conversation. But what the ancient ones called divine perception, the ability to sense Kairos, to feel the movement of the unseen, to receive prophetic awareness, this is not purely metaphysical. There is a corresponding mechanism in the human brain, a specific frequency, a specific state of neural activity that the great neuroscientists of the last century began mapping, that institutions like MIT and Harvard and Princeton have now studied in rigorous clinical environments. They call it gamma. The gamma frequency is the state of the brain that corresponds to what the mystics called heightened perception, heightened intuition, the sense of being connected to something larger than your immediate circumstances, the capacity to receive what the spirit is communicating. And here is what the research revealed: something that has changed the way the most serious researchers in this field understand human potential. Every person was born with this frequency. Every chosen one entered the world with gamma as their natural operating state. Watch a child watch the way they perceive, the way they wonder, the way they connect with things that adults have learned to dismiss. That is gamma in its full expression. But something happens. There is a phenomenon that the researchers refer to as the decline effect. Beginning around age 7, the conditions of modern life, the pace, the noise, the structures that reward compliance over perception begin to suppress the gamma frequency, slowly, consistently, until most adults are operating at a fraction of the perceptual capacity they were born with. And here is why this matters for what I am speaking to you today. The reason that chosen ones, people like you, people who were born carrying something larger than average, feel the loss of that suppression more acutely than anyone else is because they had more to lose. Your gamma was stronger, your perception was wider, and the gap between who you were as a child and who you have felt like as an adult, that gap has a name. That gap is the gamma that went quiet. I want to return to this, because what I am hearing for you about these 3 days is directly connected to whether that receiver is on, and I will come back to that. But first I need to show you what these 3 days mean specifically for your life. Not the historical pattern, not the neuroscience. What God is saying about the chosen one who is watching this message in this season at this precise threshold. What has been building in the silence is about to be revealed. And what I am about to share, what is written over April 15th, 16th, and 17th, for the chosen ones who were positioned to receive it, is going to reframe not just this week. It is going to reframe everything. Stay with me. Now let me show you what these 3 days mean specifically for the chosen one, standing exactly where you are, not the pattern in history. You have that now, not the neuroscience. You carry that too. What I want to speak to you now is the specific thing, the particular thing that God is doing in your life in this window. And what I have to say first is going to be less comfortable than recognition, but it is necessary, because the door that April 15th opens cannot be walked through by someone who is still holding what you are about to be invited to put down. So let me tell you what I hear God doing in this season across 3 specific areas of the life of every chosen one who is at this threshold. The first is your relationships. Something has been shifting in your relational world, and if you have been paying attention, you have noticed it. People who were fixtures in your life, people you assumed would simply always be there, have been moving. Some have moved away without conflict, without drama, simply drifted into distance. Some have moved away with friction. Some departures have been painful. Some have left questions you have not yet been able to answer. And you may have wondered whether you did something wrong, whether you could have held on differently, whether the losses were a sign of failure rather than a sign of movement. For those entering this season, and not everyone is, but you will know if you are here, is what is happening. The relationships that are exiting because they were calibrated for the version of you that is no longer being built. Not because those people are bad, not because you are better than them, but because what is coming for you requires a quality of connection that could not have existed in the same space as what is leaving. It will hurt. You will question whether you pushed them away. You will wonder if the distance is your fault. And, in those moments, do not try to force back what is already complete. Do not reach for what has already served its purpose and released. Because here is what happens to the chosen ones who spend their energy trying to hold what is leaving. They arrive at their Kairos window with their hands full of the past and nothing available to receive what is waiting on the other side. Trust the reorganization. Just when you think you are standing alone, you will find that the people who understand your language, who speak the frequency you are now operating at, will begin to appear in ways that feel almost too precise to be coincidental. They are not coincidental. They were assigned for this next chapter. The second area is your purpose. If you have been living in confusion about your assignment, if you have been carrying a sense of calling without clarity about its specific shape, these 3 days carry something for that confusion, not the full picture, the threshold revelation, the piece that allows you to take the next step with enough certainty to move. God does not give chosen ones the full map before they begin the journey. He gives them the next step, and then the next, and then the one after that. Not because he is withholding, but because the full map received too early produces paralysis rather than movement. The clarity that is coming in these 3 days is not the clarity of a complete vision. It is the clarity of a confirmed direction. The moment when what has been murky begins to resolve into something that you can orient yourself toward. Do not demand the full picture, receive the step. The third area is your provision. I want to speak about this carefully because I do not want to make promises that belong to God alone to make. But I can tell you what I hear the Spirit saying and what I observe across the pattern of every chosen one who has walked through a Kairos window. Provision moves when assignment becomes clear. The resources that align with your calling do not arrive before the calling is confirmed. They arrive as the confirmation becomes real. The doors that open in this season will not be doors you forced. They will be doors that match the preparation, not the performance, not the credentials on a wall, not the things you have tried to make happen. The preparation, the formation, the years of character being built in the quiet. What you were made into during the waiting is what these doors will recognize. Now, I want to pause here, and I want to speak to something that I know is present in the room, because there is something that has the potential to block chosen ones at precisely this threshold. It is not an external enemy. It is not circumstances that oppose you from the outside. It is something that lives much closer than that. It is the doubt that says, what if it is too good to be true? I need to name this directly, because this particular doubt does not feel like doubt. It does not arrive announcing itself as unbelief. It arrives feeling like wisdom. It arrives feeling like caution. It arrives feeling like the responsible, measured response of someone who has been disappointed before and learned to protect themselves from further disappointment. And it is one of the most effective things that can block a chosen one from walking through a door that is genuinely open. Here is what I want you to understand about that doubt. The fear that arises when something good approaches the instinct to protect yourself from the possibility of being wrong again. That is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of wisdom. The people who walked through every open door without discernment and crashed spectacularly, they did not have that fear. They had no awareness of the weight. They had no respect for what they were stepping into. Your healthy fear is what proves you are ready. Not the absence of fear, the presence of it, held with faithfulness. The chosen one who is most ready for a breakthrough is not the one who feels no fear. It is the one who feels the fear and moves anyway, not recklessly, but with the understanding that being called means being equipped, and that the preparation that happened in the quiet was not wasted. You were not prepared for a door that would not open. You were prepared for this one. And now, there is something else I need to speak to. Because some of you are carrying a guilt that has been heavier than you have admitted to anyone, and it is connected to the very growth that is bringing you to this threshold. The guilt of pulling away from people who did not pull away from you. The guilt of not explaining yourself when you changed. The guilt of drawing a boundary that someone else called betrayal. The guilt of becoming unavailable in ways that disappointed people who counted on your availability. The guilt of outgrowing spaces and relationships and versions of yourself and not being able to make anyone else understand why. That guilt sits heavy, I know it does, and I want to speak to it directly. You are allowed to outgrow people. You are allowed to outgrow places. You are allowed to outgrow versions of yourself that no longer fit what you were built to carry. You are allowed to protect what is being built in you, even when protecting it means disappointing someone who preferred the less protected version. You are allowed to draw a boundary that someone else does not understand. You are allowed to become quiet in seasons that required quietness, and to not owe anyone an explanation for the silence. And you are allowed fully, completely, without apology, to step into what is being released in these 3 days without the weight of who you used to be pulling you back. Growth guilt is not evidence of wrongdoing, it is evidence of evolution, and evolution is exactly what a divine threshold requires. Now I want to do something with you, not something that requires you to move or to stop what you are doing. I want to invite you into something that happens entirely on the inside. I want you to imagine yourself standing at a threshold. A door, not a door you have seen before, not a door that belongs to a memory, a door that exists in the space between where you are right now and where you are becoming. On the other side of that door is not a reward, it is not a prize, it is a room. And in that room, the version of you that God has been preparing through every difficult season, every silent month, every moment you chose faithfulness without evidence, that version of you is already there, already complete, already whole. Do not try to see what they look like. Just feel what it is like to know that they exist, that the preparation was not wasted, that what was built in the quiet was built for a purpose that is now standing at the door. Now bring your attention to your hands. Notice what your hands do when you are about to receive something that was always meant for you. Not the grasping of desperation, the opening of recognition, the hands of someone who knows that what is being offered belongs to them. That is the posture. That is what these 3 days are designed to walk you into. Stay in that for just a moment. And before this message ends, I want to tell you something. I am going to speak something specific over your life in these final moments. Something that has been building since the beginning of this message. A declaration over the chosen one who stayed, over the one who carried the weight and kept moving and is now standing exactly here. That is coming. Stay with me, because first I need to show you what the mega truth is. The one that makes everything, the pattern, the signs, the preparation, the obstacles, the 3 days themselves, the one that makes all of it collapse into a single revelation. And it is going to reframe, not just these dates. It is going to reframe the entire story of your life, up to this moment. Here it is. April 15th, 16th and 17th are not significant because of what will happen to you during those days. They are significant because of what was happening in you during every day that came before them. You were not waiting, you were becoming. Read that again in your own mind. Let it land. You were not in a holding pattern while God delayed a blessing. You were in a formation process while God completed a preparation. The silence was not absence, it was architecture. The delay was not denial, it was development. The stillness was not stagnation, it was the final stage of construction on a soul that needed to be fully built before it could carry what was being held in reserve for it. Joseph did not walk into the palace as the young man who was thrown into the pit. He walked in as the man who was formed by it. The pit did not happen to him. The pit happened for him, for the assignment that required someone who had been shaped by exactly that kind of darkness. Esther did not step into the king's court as the girl who was taken from her home. She stepped in as the woman who had been made by displacement and discipline, and the particular courage of someone who had learned to be faithful in a space that was not yet her own. And you did not arrive at April 15th as the person you were at the beginning of the hard season. You arrived as the person that season created. And the person that season created is exactly who is needed for what these 3 days are releasing. You went in needing to understand, and you are coming out knowing. You went in asking if you were chosen, and you are coming out certain. You went in carrying grief as weight, and you are coming out carrying it as credential. You went in doubting the voice inside you, and you are coming out authorized to use it. You went in holding the door waiting for permission, and you are coming out understanding that the permission was issued long before you arrived at the door. These 3 days do not create your destiny, they confirm it. And who are you? Who is the chosen one standing at this confirmation? You are a seer. You perceive what others pass by. You have felt things, known things, recognized things that you could not explain to the people around you, and you were not wrong. You were not overreacting. You were not being dramatic. You were operating in a perceptual gift that was given to you before you were born and has been active in you your entire life. Trust what you see. You are a pioneer. You are not following a path that someone else laid. You are walking into territory that, in many ways, has never been walked in your specific lineage, your specific context, your specific calling. That is why it feels lonely. Pioneers are always somewhat ahead of the company they will eventually gather. The company is coming. Move. You are a voice. What you carry has the capacity to articulate what others feel and cannot find words for. The words that rise in you, the truths, the perceptions, the things you have kept quiet because you were not sure anyone would receive them, those words are not for your journal alone. They are for the room. They are for the season. They are for what comes after April 17th. This is not random. This is not coincidence. This is not accident. Now, I said I would return to something, and it is time. I promised to come back to the question of the receiver, the gamma frequency, the God-given perceptual capacity that every chosen one was born carrying and that the conditions of modern life began suppressing from childhood onward. I want to speak about this now, because what has been declared over you in this message, the identity, the appointment, the confirmation, all of it is received not just by the Spirit, but through the full instrument of who you are. And the full instrument includes the biological reality of how your brain is calibrated. Here is what I need you to understand. There is a woman I want to tell you about. She had spent years looking for the kind of connection I am describing, the sense of the divine communicating clearly, of synchronicities that were undeniable, of being in the frequency of what she was always meant for. She had tried the retreat centers. She had tried the practices. She had sat in the circles. And the connection she was looking for, the real connection, the tangible sense of the unseen speaking, had remained just out of reach. She described it as standing outside a room where something beautiful was happening, hearing the music through the door, but never quite being able to open it. And then she found what Dr. Robert Lake had been developing for over 3 decades. The research that began in the neuroscience departments of major institutions and eventually produced something that most people have never heard of, because the kind of truth that has the potential to change how widely the divine receiver functions in human beings is not the kind of truth that gets promoted. Dr. Lake's work, what he documented in research that has since reached over 18,000 people, identified that the gamma frequency, the God-given brainwave associated with peak perception, spiritual awareness, and what the mystics called clarity of inner vision, can be re-engaged. Not through years of disciplined practice alone, not through thousands of dollars of biofeedback equipment, but through a specific form of audio technology that works directly with the brain's natural frequency response. The woman I told you about, within 2 weeks, she had one word for what changed. Synchronicities. The music behind the door became audible. The channel that had been stuck on static began to resolve into signal. I am going to return to this in a moment, because what I want you to understand is that for the chosen one, standing at a Kairos threshold, for someone who is about to walk through a door that has been prepared over years of formation, having your receiver calibrated is not a luxury. It is the difference between walking through April 17th with the full instrument you were given and walking through it with something essential, still suppressed. I am going to tell you specifically how to access what Dr. Lake built. But first, there is something I have been building toward this entire message that I need to deliver, because I promised you at the beginning that before this message ended, I would speak something over your life, something specific, something for the chosen one who stayed, and I always keep that promise. So I need you to stay with me through what comes next, because what I am about to speak, what is about to be released over you, is the reason this message was sent to find you in this particular window. Everything we have walked through together was building to this moment. Now I want to return to what I said about Dr. Robert Lake and the technology he built, because it is directly connected to what I am about to declare over you. I told you about the woman who found synchronicities. What I did not tell you yet is what that shift made possible. The clarity that came was not just spiritual in feeling, it was functional. Decisions that had been paralyzed for months resolved in a single morning. Connections that had seemed impossible began arriving with a precision that felt like, and I am using her word, coordination, as if something behind the scenes had been orchestrating the sequence, waiting only for her receiver to come online. That is what gamma re-engagement produces. And I want to be honest with you about something, because honesty is what builds trust. And trust is the only currency that matters in a space like this. Brain entrainment, the technology that Dr. Lake used, is not magic. It is not a guarantee of any specific outcome. It is not a replacement for the faithfulness, the discipline, the formation work that has already happened in you. What it is, and what the research documents with remarkable consistency, is a recalibration, a tuning of the instrument, the same instrument you already have, operating at the frequency it was originally designed for. You may have tried things before, practices that promised access to this kind of clarity and did not deliver it. And if you did, I understand the hesitation that creates. That hesitation is not weakness. It is the wisdom of someone who has been disappointed and learned to be careful. But here is the difference. Everything else you may have tried required the brain to change itself from the inside through discipline, through repetition, through the slow accumulation of new habits. Brain entrainment does something different. It uses sound frequencies to work with the brain directly from the outside in meeting the neural activity where it is and guiding it toward a state that the brain recognizes because it is the state it was born for. There are people who have spent years in disciplined meditation, attempting to access the gamma state regularly. Some get there, many do not because they lack dedication, but because the suppression runs deep, and the brain, when left entirely to its own momentum, tends to stay in familiar territory. What Dr. Lake compressed into a 7-minute audio track bypasses that resistance. 7 minutes, a pair of headphones, no prior experience required, no practice routine, no equipment costing thousands of dollars. The people who have used it have reported things that, if I described them to someone who had never experienced this kind of clarity, might sound too good to be true. The provider from Texas, a man who had been out of work for nearly 2 years, sharp in every credential but foggy in the moments that mattered, described the change not as something that happened to his resume. He said the change happened in his head. And within 11 days, he had received an offer that was better than the position he had lost. Others have described the return of what they call flow, that state where the right thought arrives at the right moment, where the right connection presents itself without force, where life begins to feel less like pushing against current and more like being carried by it. That is not coincidence. That is the gamma frequency doing what it was designed to do in the life of someone it was always meant for. Now, I want to address something before I tell you how to access this. Because if you are sitting with a question right now that sounds something like, I have tried everything and nothing has worked, why would this be different? I want to speak to that directly. Every other approach you have tried asked your brain to change itself. Meditation, visualization, healing sounds, spiritual practices, all of them work by asking your neural activity to shift through sustained internal effort over time. And for some people, in some seasons, that works beautifully. But brain entrainment does not ask your brain to do anything. It does the work directly. It is not another thing on the list of things you have to maintain and practice and discipline yourself into. It is 7 minutes of allowing the technology to meet your brain where it is and recalibrate it from the outside. The mechanism is completely different, and the mechanism is why the results are different. And if you are wondering about the cost, I want to speak to that with the same honesty. The traditional path to gamma access professional biofeedback therapy runs approximately $300 per hour. Clinical grade equipment for home use starts at $7,000. And disciplined meditation, even when it works, typically requires months or years before consistent gamma access becomes available. Dr. Lake compressed 3 decades of research into a 7-minute audio track. The original price point for that technology was $49, already a fraction of any alternative. But for the chosen ones who encounter this message for you, it is available at $39. Not through any platform you can search, not on Amazon, not anywhere else. The link is in the pinned comment and description below. That price exists because Dr. Lake's mission is not to sell a product. His mission is to get this technology into the hands of the people who were meant to have it. And the people who find this message through a video like this one are, in his words, exactly who he built it for. There are also 4 things included at no additional cost for anyone who accesses it through this link. The first is Genius Child, an audio track designed to activate focus and clarity specifically for children, using the same brain entrainment technology. The second is the original book that the film The Secret drew its inspiration from, a text that deals with the financial and practical dimensions of aligned living far more rigorously than the film did. It sells for $20 on Amazon. It comes included. The third is a guided visualization specifically designed for 4 areas of life: finances, relationships, health, and clarity of purpose. And the fourth is an infographic documenting the 5 most important habits for building the kind of life that aligns with who you are being called to become. All of that, along with the full technology, for $39, with 100% money-back guarantee, no conditions, no restrictions on how many times you use it before requesting the return. The only risk is not trying. And I want to protect you from something before you do. There are sites that have duplicated the name, imitations that carry the words but not the technology, audio tracks that sound similar but contain none of the brain entrainment frequencies that make the original what it is. If you search for this anywhere outside the link in the pinned comment on Amazon, on any other platform, anywhere in search results, what you will find is not what Dr. Lake built. It is a copy without the architecture. The only place the authentic technology exists, with the full bonus package and the complete money-back guarantee, is through the link that is pinned below this message and in the description. I tell you this not as a transaction. I tell you this the way I would tell a person I care about: check the link. Use only that link. Do not let someone else's imitation cost you the real thing. Now, there is something I told you at the beginning of this message that I have not yet delivered. I told you that before this ends, I would speak something over your life, something specific to the chosen one who stayed, and I meant it. So, I need you to stay with me now, because what comes next, what is about to be released in this space, is not a closing formality. It is the reason you were sent to this message, and for what comes after April 17th, for what the deeper journey holds, what some have called destiny's embrace. That is a conversation for another time. Tonight, this is where we begin. Come with me into what comes next. I want to take a moment before we close this message, and I want to do it with the weight it deserves, because you came here carrying something. And whether you came in awareness of what you were carrying or simply with the low-level signal that something mattered about this, you stayed. You moved through the recognition and the pattern and the revelation and the declaration. You stayed through the moments that were uncomfortable and the moments that were too close to be comfortable and the moments that asked something of you. That is not a small thing. So I want to start here. Father, I want to thank you for every chosen one who found their way to this message. Not by algorithm, not by accident, but because they were being guided toward a word that was prepared for them in this window. I thank you for the faithfulness of the ones who are hearing this, the faithfulness that looked small to them, but was enormous to you. The prayers whispered in the dark. The mornings they got up and kept moving when the evidence was scarce. The quiet discipline of continuing to carry what they could not yet see fulfilled. Thank you for witnessing what they thought was invisible. And now, I want to acknowledge something on behalf of every chosen one in this space. You see the weight that was carried into this season. You see the questions that were held in the dark, the ones that could not be spoken aloud, because speaking them would have made them feel more real than the faith that was trying to survive alongside them. You see the moments of faithfulness that no one else observed, the private decisions to remain, to continue, to trust, when trust was the only thing left. You see what they called small that was not small to you. You see the grief of seasons that took more than they were supposed to. You see the loneliness of carrying something that the people around them could not fully hold with them. You see the weariness, and you see, beneath the weariness, the thing that would not be extinguished. The small flame of knowing that would not go out, no matter how long the dark lasted. You saw all of it. And now we release what needs to be released before we step through the door. I release the old story that said the delay was the destination. Release. I release the comparison that measured this timeline against the timelines of others who seem to arrive faster and easier and with less cost. Release. I release the wound that came wearing a familiar face, the betrayal that arrived through someone trusted, the disappointment that left a scar that made trust harder afterward. Release. I release the version of me that needed permission from the outside to become what was already being built on the inside. Release. I release the ceiling that was constructed from the opinions of people who were not authorized to define the limits of what I was made for. Release. I release the grief of seasons that took more than they were supposed to, the losses that still live in the body, as tension, as guardedness, as a kind of low-level bracing for what might be taken next. Release. I release the weight of carrying a calling alone, the exhaustion of being the one who held the vision when no one else could see it yet. Release. I release the doubt that disguised itself as wisdom, the protective mechanism that learned to call good things too good to be true before they had a chance to be real. Release. I release every agreement made with smallness, every moment of shrinking that was practiced until it became habit, every word spoken or unspoken that reduced what was real about this chosen one to something manageable for the comfort of people who were not comfortable with their full expression. Release. Every single thing that was released in this moment, it is gone. It does not go with you through the door. And now we activate. I activate the full expression of who this chosen one was built to be. Not the defended version, not the edited version, not the version that learned to stay small enough to be safe. The full version, the seer whose perception was never wrong, only ahead. Who felt things in rooms that others missed, and saw things in people that others skipped past, and knew things before the knowing was explainable. That seer is activated now. Trust what you see. The pioneer who goes first into territory that has no precedent in the specific lineage, the specific calling, the specific chapter that is opening. Who moves in the direction of the calling without waiting for the full map. Who understands that pioneers are always somewhat ahead of the company they will gather, and that the company is coming. Move. The voice whose words carry something that the room needs and has not yet heard from anyone else, who has kept quiet long enough and contained long enough and edited enough. The voice is activated now. What rises from you is not accidental. It is assignment. The spiritual warrior who does not collapse under pressure, who has held ground in every season that was designed to break them and did not break, who understands that the ground they are standing on belongs to them not because they seized it, but because they remained on it when everything tried to move them. And the bridge who stands between what was and what is coming, who carries the capacity to connect what was separated, to make what was inaccessible accessible, to be the person through whom others find their way to something they could not have found alone. I activate the connections that were assigned for this next chapter, the right relationships, the right collaborations, the specific people whose paths were always meant to intersect with yours in this season. I open the doors that disbelief has held closed, not by force, not by striving, but by the authority of a chosen one who has been prepared for exactly what is on the other side. And I cover what is rising. I cover the breakthrough from premature exposure. What is being built does not need to be announced before it is complete. What is being given does not need to be explained before it is established. Guard what is new. Protect what is fragile in its early stages. Not everything that is real needs an audience before it is ready. I cover the rising from the pattern of self-sabotage, from the familiar reflex that blows up what is good when it gets close enough to matter, from the internal mechanism that says this is too good, something must be wrong, I should find the exit before it finds me. That pattern has no authority here. It is covered. It is silenced. And now we declare, I am a chosen one. Not because I earned it, not because I performed it, not because I arrived without questions, or without doubt, or without the weight of a long and difficult season, because I was made for this, because the preparation that happened in the quiet was not wasted, because the calling that lived in me through every season that tried to extinguish it is real, and it is ready, and it is mine to carry. I carry something this world needs, not eventually, now. In this form, in this season, with the specific combination of gifts and formation and hard-won understanding that belongs only to me, I go forward from this day authorized, not waiting for the external confirmation that the internal knowing already gave, not holding back the version of me that these 3 days were designed to release. Authorized, positioned, ready, we are the ones who showed up in the wilderness and did not leave. We are the ones who kept faith when faith was the only currency we had left. We are the ones standing at April 15th, 16th, and 17th, not by accident, by appointment, by design, by the same pattern that carried Joseph from the pit to the palace, by the same Kairos that called Esther to stand in the court for such a time as this, by the same divine signature that has marked every 3-day threshold in sacred history with the fingerprint of resurrection. That fingerprint is on these days, and it is on you. Do not say amen yet. I want you to stay in this frequency for just a moment. You do not have to do anything. You do not have to perform what was just declared or confirm it, or make yourself feel it more strongly than you do. Just let it settle. Let what was spoken find the places in you that have been waiting to hear it, the places that had almost stopped expecting to receive it. Let the declaration land in those places. You have been carrying something for a long time. You are allowed to let someone carry it with you for just a moment. That is what this is. Stay. You are not alone in what you are carrying. Right now, all across the world, chosen ones are moving through this same threshold. They are standing at their own 3-day windows. They are releasing the same weights. They are receiving the same confirmation. They are being activated for assignments that are specific to them and connected to something much larger than any individual story. You are part of something that is larger than this moment. And the chosen one on your mind right now, the one who has been unusually quiet lately, the one who seems to be going through something they cannot fully explain, the one whose silence you have been slightly worried about, they were put on your mind for a reason. Share this message with them, not as a recommendation, as an act of care. If what was spoken over you in this space shifted something, if something in the last few moments landed in a place where you needed it to land, type the words, "It is done," in the comments. Let that be your seal. Let that declaration become the anchor of what was released and received in this window. And if your spirit was moved by this message, and you want to stay connected to what continues to be spoken for the chosen ones in this season, the subscribe button is below. Not because a channel needs your number, but because you belong to a community of people who speak the same language. You have always spoken and been waiting to find people who understood. And one more thing, for those who feel led, who feel the pull toward what I described about the gamma frequency, about Dr. Lake's work, about recalibrating the receiver before you walk through what these 3 days are. Opening the information is in the pinned comment and in the description below. Investigate it only if your spirit moves you toward it. No urgency beyond this. The version of you that walks through April 17th with your receiver fully calibrated, and the version that walks through it with that capacity still suppressed, those are two different journeys, and only one of them gets to experience the full measure of what was prepared for the chosen one you are. The door is open. It is done. It is sealed. We receive it. And so it is. Amen. Chosen one. Before I say anything else today, I want to acknowledge something that most messages skip over, because they want to get to the good part quickly, and in doing so, they miss the person entirely. You are tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from months, maybe years, of carrying something in faith without visible confirmation. The kind that makes you question whether your belief is actually faith or just the last form of hope you have not yet let go of. I see that, and I am not going to rush past it. But I also need to say this, and I need to say it clearly and without softening it. Your rightful blessing is not somewhere in the distance still forming. It is not waiting for a future version of you to be ready. It is not being withheld because of your past or your failures or the things you are still working through. It is being delivered right now, at this very moment. The movement has already begun. And what this message is going to do over the next several minutes, in full honesty and without hype, is show you 3 things that most chosen ones never receive because nobody ever taught them. Why the blessing is always moving toward you even when you cannot feel it. What unconsciously blocks a chosen one from fully receiving what God has already released. And what a real receiving posture looks like, not as a passive hope, but as an active, practiced spiritual reality. This is not a message you stumbled onto, and by the end, you will understand exactly why. So wherever you are right now, I need you to do one thing. Not physically, I mean inside. I need you to stop the part of your mind that is already composing a response to what I am saying. The part that is deciding whether to believe this before it has even heard it. Just for a moment, set that down. Let what is here actually land, because what I am about to share with you matters, and you deserve to receive it fully. Let me start where it actually begins, not with the blessing, with the waiting. You have been faithful when the confirmation did not come. You have been faithful when someone else received what you had been praying for. You have been faithful when the silence stretched so long you began to wonder if you were talking to anyone at all. You have been faithful when the people around you stopped believing for you because they stopped believing in waiting. You have been faithful when everything inside you wanted to stop, and you did not stop, and nobody saw that, and nobody gave you credit for it, and you kept going anyway. I want to say something about that before we go any further. That faithfulness is not invisible. It has not been wasted. Every single day you held on when you had a reason to let go, something was being built. Not because suffering is romantic, not because God needed you to prove yourself, but because what is being delivered to you is so specific, so precisely calibrated to who you are, that it required time to prepare. Not generic time, yours. And I know that does not always make the waiting easier to hold. I know that when you are in the middle of it, the theological truth of something is being prepared does not always reach the place inside you that just needs to know it is real. So, I am not going to give you a theological answer right now. I am going to give you something more grounded than that. I am going to give you evidence, because there are signs, specific, identifiable signs that the delivery has already begun. And most chosen ones are experiencing them right now without understanding what they mean. They are interpreting these signs as problems when they are actually proof. They are trying to fix what is not broken. They are medicating the very symptoms of spiritual movement. And that is what we are going to talk about today. But before I show you the signs, I want to say one more thing about the weight you have been carrying. The specific exhaustion a chosen one carries in a waiting season is not the same as ordinary tiredness. It is heavier. It sits in a different place. It is the exhaustion of someone who was given a vision too large to explain to the people around them, who then had to carry that vision alone, who then began to wonder in the silence whether the vision was real or whether they invented it because they needed to believe in something. That particular kind of exhaustion has a name. It is not depression, although it can look like it from the outside. It is not a lack of faith, although the enemy will try to tell you that it is. It is the specific weight carried by those who were given a promise too large to fully comprehend in the season it was given. And the fact that you are still here, still watching, still reaching for something you cannot yet see, that is not weakness. That is the most specific kind of strength there is. So here is what I want you to hold before we continue. Hold this thought in the center of your mind right now, not as a wish, but as a working truth. The waiting was not a punishment. The silence was not rejection. And the distance you have felt was not God turning away. It was God building. Now let me show you what that building looks like from the outside. The first sign that your rightful blessing is already in motion is something I call unexplained restlessness. You know this sign. You feel it especially in the quiet at night, in the early morning, in the middle of conversations that should feel normal but suddenly feel hollow. A stirring, an urgency that does not attach to anything specific but will not go away. Most people call this anxiety. Most people try to calm it down. But this is not anxiety. This is your spirit registering movement before your mind has been given permission to register it. Your spirit is aware that something is shifting in the unseen, and it is responding. The restlessness is not a problem to solve. It is a signal to receive. The second sign is that your tolerance for certain environments and certain conversations has changed. Things that used to feel normal now feel suffocating. Places you used to fit into now feel like they are the wrong size. Conversations that used to feel comfortable now leave you drained in a way that is hard to explain. And you may have wondered if something is wrong with you, if you have become difficult or closed off or less loving than you used to be. But what is actually happening is more specific than that. Your frequency is shifting, and when your frequency shifts, environments that operated at your old level start to feel like friction. This is not a sign that you are growing cold. This is a sign that you are growing. The container you used to fit inside is no longer the right shape. That is not loss. That is evidence of movement. The third sign involves your dreams. Not every dream, but the ones that have been arriving recently with more weight than usual. The ones that feel more real than sleep should allow. The ones where you are searching for something, or arriving somewhere, or meeting someone you cannot quite name but whose presence carries a specific warmth. These are not random. I am not saying every dream is prophetic, but there is a category of dream that visits chosen ones in threshold seasons. Seasons where something is ending and something is beginning, and these dreams carry the texture of arrival. If you have been having dreams that feel different lately, pay attention to the feeling they leave behind. Not the narrative, the feeling. That is the message. The fourth sign is the appearance of repeating confirmations. Numbers you keep seeing. A song that plays at exactly the right moment. A conversation you overhear that speaks directly to something you have been carrying privately. A phrase that appears 3 times in 3 different places on the same day. Most people explain these away because explaining them away feels safer than sitting with what they might mean. But chosen ones, by nature, are wired to notice pattern. And the pattern appearing in your life right now is not coincidence. It is not an algorithm. It is not your brain looking for what it wants to find. It is confirmation that what you have been believing for is being confirmed by something outside of your own longing. The fifth sign is something subtler and more painful. It is grief. A grief that is arriving not because something terrible happened, but because something is ending. Relationships that used to feel essential are quietly becoming less central. Chapters that you loved are quietly closing. And even though nothing catastrophic has occurred, something in you is mourning. If you have been feeling this kind of unnamed grief, I need you to hear this. That grief is appropriate. You are allowed to mourn the ending of something that was real, even if what is coming is better. The grief is not a sign that you are losing. It is a sign that you are crossing a threshold. And every threshold requires leaving something on the other side. The sixth sign is the quietest one, and the one most likely to be dismissed. It is a knowing. A deep, low, specific knowing, underneath all the doubt and all the noise, a knowing that something is real, that something is coming, that something with your name on it is already in motion. You have probably argued with this knowing. You have probably called it wishful thinking. You have probably buried it under logic and protection and the memory of times you believed and felt foolish afterward. But it has not gone away. And that is not nothing. That is not you inventing comfort. That is discernment. And it is one of the most reliable signs that a chosen one is standing at the edge of a new season. These 6 signs are not problems. They are not symptoms of imbalance. They are the specific indicators that a delivery is already underway. And if you are experiencing several of them right now, and I believe you are, or you would not still be watching, then what I need you to understand is this. The blessing is not on its way. The delivery has already begun. Now, I want to pause here and say something important, and I want to invite you to stay with me through the rest of this message, because what I am going to share in the coming sections is not something you will hear everywhere. I am going to show you the internal architecture that either opens you to receive what is being delivered or quietly keeps it at the door. I am going to give you a specific framework that the most prepared chosen ones use not to pursue the blessing harder, but to position themselves to actually receive it. And I am going to show you something that science discovered about why chosen ones experience the delay differently than other people. Something that, when I first encountered it, reframed everything I thought I understood about waiting seasons. Stay with me. These are not things you will want to miss. Now, let me tell you about the waiting itself, because the most important reframe of this entire message starts here. You have probably been taught that the wilderness is a penalty, a place of punishment for a mistake or a setback, a spiritual timeout where God waits for you to get yourself together before He moves again. But what if that framing is completely wrong? What if the wilderness is not a penalty but a preparation? And not a generic preparation, a precise, surgical one. Here is the first thing the wilderness was doing while you were waiting. It was stripping away the false version of your identity, the one built on approval, on performance, on being needed, on being the person others expected you to be. Most chosen ones carry a layered identity, the real one underneath, and a constructed one on top, built over years of learning what made people stay, what made people approve, what made people feel safe around you. And the wilderness, in its silence, in its isolation, in its removal of all the external sources of identity confirmation, it peels those layers. Not to punish you, to prepare you, because what is being delivered to you next requires the real version of you to be home, not the performed version, the actual one. The second thing the wilderness was doing is this. It was teaching you things you could not have learned any other way. You developed a capacity for solitude that most people never access. You developed a relationship with your own inner voice that would not have been possible when the noise was louder. You learned to distinguish between the voice of fear and the voice of guidance. You learned patience that is not passive, the active, intentional kind that holds steady without forcing. You learned what actually matters to you when everything you thought mattered was removed. These are not small skills. These are the specific tools you will need for exactly what is coming. And none of them could have been acquired in a more comfortable season. The third thing the wilderness was doing is the one that tends to hurt the most to acknowledge. It was clearing relationships. Not all of them, but the ones that were not built to accompany where you are going. Some of those relationships ended in visible ways: conflict, betrayal, distance that was obvious. But some of them ended quietly, in the natural drift that happens when two people are no longer on the same frequency. And you may have grieved those losses without fully understanding why they had to happen. But here is what I need you to understand. The relationships that left were not taken from you as punishment. They were released because they could not carry the weight of where you are going. The connections that remain and the new ones that are arriving are built for the next chapter, not the last one. What felt like isolation was actually incubation. What felt like delay was actually development. What felt like silence was actually strategy. What felt like abandonment was actually preparation for arrival. That is not poetry. That is what was actually happening. I want to show you something now that will bring this into even sharper focus. There is an image that runs through ancient wisdom traditions from multiple cultures, not just one, and it is the image of a seed buried in the ground. I want to use this image not because it is poetic, but because it is structurally accurate. Because what happens to a seed in the ground is exactly what has been happening to you. A seed in the ground is not failing. It is not forgotten. From the outside, from anyone watching the surface, nothing appears to be happening. There is no visible growth. There is no evidence of life. There is only the quiet, unobservable, underground reality of something becoming what it was designed to become. The seed is drawing nutrients. The seed is splitting open at the casing, which is an act of breaking, not an act of destruction. The seed is sending root systems down before it sends anything upward, because the height of what grows above ground is always determined by the depth of what was established below it. You have been in the ground, not as punishment, as formation. And the depth of what is being built in you right now, the root system, the foundation, the invisible architecture, will determine the height of everything that comes next. The thing that most people miss about the seed is this. The seed does not force its own emergence. It does not push itself out of the ground ahead of the season. It moves when the conditions are right, and when it moves, it does not ask permission. It simply arrives. And when the first sign of green breaks through the surface, anyone watching will call it sudden. But it was never sudden. It was perfectly timed. Your emergence is coming. And it is not going to look sudden to you, because you have been underground long enough to know how much work went into it. But to those watching your life from the outside, it is going to look like something happened overnight. Let them call it that. You will know the truth. Now, before I move to what I need to show you next, I want to say something about what happens at the moment of arrival, because this is where the teaching I have for you today becomes critical. Most chosen ones prepare for the blessing by waiting for it. And waiting is important. But waiting is not the same as receiving. And here is the thing that I have seen happen over and over in the most faithful, most prepared chosen ones. The blessing arrives, and they almost miss it. Not because they were not ready in terms of faith, not because they had not waited long enough, but because the posture they had developed during the waiting, the protective, guarded, careful posture that helped them survive the wilderness, was exactly the wrong posture for receiving. You protect yourself when you are in the wilderness. That is wisdom. But the wilderness posture is a defensive posture, and a defensive posture, carried into the season of delivery, can look just enough like faith that you never realize it is actually blocking you. I am going to show you exactly what that looks like, and I am going to give you a specific, practical, learnable posture that replaces it. But first, there is something I need to tell you about the scientific dimension of this, about what Dr. Robert Lake, who spent 34 years studying the neuroscience of transformation, who built an entire body of research he called the youthful brain, discovered about the specific frequency that chosen ones carry at birth and what happens to it over time. It is the thing that explains why the waiting hits differently for you than it does for other people. Why the gap between who you feel you were designed to be and who you are currently living as can feel so specifically painful. And why a particular discovery from the intersection of neuroscience and spiritual truth may be the final piece of the receiving posture you have been missing. I will come back to that. But there is something even more important I need you to see first. Chosen one, I want to stay with you in this space for a moment before I move forward. Because there is a truth I need to give you now that is going to change something, not at the surface, but in the foundation. You have been operating under an identity that is smaller than the one you were given. I do not say that as a motivational phrase. I say it as a structural observation, because everything I have seen in the lives of people who carry what you carry points to the same pattern. The external conditions of their lives do not reflect the actual capacity inside them. And the gap between those two things, what they are capable of and what they are currently living, is not a gap of effort. It is not a gap of faith. It is a gap of identity. You thought things others dismissed. You saw connections others could not follow. You felt the weight of situations that were not even yours to carry, and you carried them anyway, because something in you could not look away. You stayed up with questions that had no quick answers. You felt things at a depth that made ordinary conversations feel like they were missing something, and you learned to hide that depth because you discovered early that not everyone could hold it with you. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with the answer without immediately deflecting it. Is any of that arrogance? Is there a single thing I just described that came from pride? No, it did not. That sensitivity, that perception, that depth, that is not a personality trait. That is an assignment. And the specific things that have made you feel like you do not quite fit anywhere are not flaws in your design. They are evidence of what you were designed for. I hear the Father saying to you right now, and I carry this carefully, because I want it to reach the right place in you, and not just the surface. I hear him saying, I did not design you for average, and I did not put that longing in you to torture you. I put it there so you would never stop before you arrived. Let that land for a moment, because what I need you to understand is that the waiting was never random. The specific shape of your wilderness, the particular relationships that broke, the specific dreams that were delayed, the exact areas where you felt most invisible, none of that was arbitrary. It was custom. It was designed for you, not because you deserved hardship, but because what is being built for you required a foundation that only that specific process could create. Now I want to give you something concrete, because the most dangerous thing that can happen in this season is that you understand the truth about your identity intellectually, but continue to operate from a smaller one in practice. So I want to name, specifically, who you are in this season, not as a wish, as a description of what is actually true. The first thing I want to name is this: you are a seer. And I do not mean that in a dramatic or performative sense. I mean that you perceive things before they become visible to others. You have sensed what was coming in situations before it arrived. You have known when something was wrong before you had language for it. You have felt the shift in a room, in a relationship, in a season, before anyone else registered it. That is not imagination. That is a specific perceptual gift, and it is not incidental to your calling, it is central to it. The second thing I want to name is that you are a receiver, and I want to spend a moment here, because this archetype is the one most chosen ones have the hardest time accepting. You were not born with the capacity to receive small things. You were born with the capacity to receive large ones, and the discomfort you have always felt when what arrived in your life was smaller than what you knew was possible, that discomfort was not ingratitude. It was accuracy. Your spirit was accurately measuring the gap between what arrived and what was actually yours. The frustration was not pride. It was a receiver recognizing that what was in their hands was not yet the full delivery. The third thing I want to name is that you are a cycle breaker. What is being delivered to you in this season is not just for you. It is also for everyone who comes from you, behind you, after you. You are standing at the edge of a generational shift. The patterns that have repeated in your lineage, the specific ways that limitation has moved through your family, your community, your inherited identity, they stop with you. Not because you decided they would, because you were positioned to be the one who would carry a different frequency into a different future. And everything you have survived that should have broken you and did not, that is the evidence. The fourth thing I want to name is that you are a light bearer. And this one has a specific weight to it, because it means the blessing you are about to receive is not just for your comfort. It is a delivery that carries a dimension of purpose. When you step into the fullness of what is being given to you, you will not be able to help but illuminate something for someone else. Not because you will try to, because that is what light does. It does not perform. It does not announce itself. It simply reveals what was always there. And the fifth thing I want to name is that you are a wounded healer. This is the hardest one to claim, because it requires you to look at the very things you most wish had not happened to you and recognize them as the source of your greatest medicine. The specific pain you carry, the particular kind of loneliness, the specific shape of the betrayal, the exact flavor of the delay that is not incidental to your calling. That is the content of it. The people who will one day be changed by your presence are the people who carry exactly what you have carried. And they will believe you not because you have perfect words, but because you have survived what they are surviving. Your wounds are not a liability. They are a credential. You are a seer. You are a receiver. You are a cycle breaker. You are a light bearer. And you are a wounded healer. That is not a motivational list. That is a description of what was established about you before you had any say in the matter. Now, and this is the part I need you to hear carefully, knowing who you are is not the same as living from who you are. And the gap between those two things is where most chosen ones quietly get stuck. Not because they lack faith, not because they lack desire, but because there are specific internal patterns deeply embedded, quietly operating, that block a chosen one from receiving what they were designed to receive. I want to name 3 of them. The first one is the pattern of control. And I want to be specific about how it operates, because it rarely looks like what we expect. It does not usually look like someone demanding to be in charge. It looks like someone who has been hurt enough times that they developed a very precise internal system for managing outcomes, for anticipating what might go wrong, for staying one step ahead of disappointment. It looks like constant preparation. It looks like always having a plan. It looks like being the person who never fully relaxes, because some part of you knows from experience that the moment you fully relax is sometimes the moment something breaks. That is not a character flaw. That is a protection mechanism that worked. In the wilderness, that mechanism helped you survive. But when you carry it into the season of delivery, it becomes the thing that keeps your hands from opening wide enough to receive what is being placed in them. Because receiving requires a particular kind of surrender that control, even intelligent, understandable, justified control, cannot coexist with. And the blessing cannot be forced into clenched hands. It has to be received into open ones. The second pattern is the doubt loop. And this one is subtle enough that most chosen ones do not recognize it as a pattern. They experience it as a reasonable response to an uncertain situation. It goes like this. Something good arrives. Evidence appears. A door opens. A confirmation comes. And for a brief moment, you feel it, the sense that this is real, that something is finally moving. And then, almost immediately, a quieter voice begins. Maybe this is not what it looks like. Maybe this is temporary. Maybe I am reading into it. Maybe I should not get my hopes up again. And that voice, which presents itself as wisdom and protection and discernment, is actually the pattern of doubt that has been installed by every time you believed and then the thing did not arrive the way you expected. I want to be very careful here, because I am not telling you to be naive. Discernment is real and necessary, but there is a specific difference between discernment and the doubt loop. Discernment evaluates, it examines, it takes information and draws a conclusion. The doubt loop does something different. It arrives before the evidence is in. It arrives before you have had time to actually evaluate. It arrives the moment something good appears, and its function is not to protect you. Its function is to return you to the familiar discomfort of waiting, because waiting has become the known state, and receiving has become unfamiliar. Here is what I want to say about that. The doubt loop was installed by your history. It does not belong to your identity, and it is not the voice of wisdom. It is the voice of a wounded self trying to protect you from a disappointment that may never come. And when the blessing arrives, your rightful blessing, the one that has your name on it, the most important thing you can do is recognize the loop when it starts and choose not to follow it all the way to the end. The third pattern is the most painful to name, because it is the one nobody wants to admit to. It is unworthiness. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind where you believe you are worthless or broken beyond repair. The quiet kind, the functional kind, the kind that does not live in your thoughts but in your behavior. It lives in the way you pursue the blessing more naturally than you receive it. It lives in the constant activity that looks like faith from the outside but is actually running toward the thing so hard that you never have to stand still and let the thing come to you. It lives in the way you are better at believing for others than for yourself. It lives in the way that when something genuinely good arrives, some part of you immediately begins looking for the catch. And if any of that sounds familiar, if any of it landed somewhere specific, I want to say something to you now, not as a correction, as a truth. You are allowed to receive without earning it in the moment of reception. You are allowed to stand still while the blessing arrives. You are allowed to not have fully figured out your worthiness before the delivery comes, because worthiness was never something you were supposed to manufacture. It was given, it was established. It was written into you before the waiting began. I want to give you a moment to let that land before I continue, because there is something about that truth, specifically about the permission to receive what is already yours, that requires a particular kind of internal agreement. And some of you have been fighting that agreement for a very long time. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that waited. You are allowed to step into a season that makes your past almost unrecognizable. You are allowed to receive what you did not earn in this exact moment. You are allowed to be the answer to someone else's prayer. You are allowed to let God complete what God started. You are allowed to stop managing the delivery and simply open the door. And you are allowed deeply, fully, without qualification, to believe that what is coming is real. Now, I want to talk about what happens when those three patterns, control, doubt, and quiet unworthiness, are specifically active in a chosen one during a season of breakthrough. Because there is something that makes this particularly difficult for people like you. You feel the weight of the blessing more acutely than average. You are not indifferent to what you are waiting for. You feel it in a specific way that other people do not. And that intensity of feeling makes the protection mechanism stronger. The higher the stake, the tighter the grip. The larger the promise, the louder the doubt loop. The more specific the calling, the more active the unworthiness pattern. And if I am honest, there is something else happening too. Some of you have been experiencing something in this season that feels like guilt, not because you have done something wrong, but because you have been growing, and growing has created distance from people, from dynamics, from earlier versions of yourself. And that distance, even though it was necessary, has carried a quiet shame with it. A sense that if you had been better, you could have brought them with you, that if you had been more patient, you would not have needed the space, that your evolution has somehow been a betrayal. I want to name that clearly, because it is one of the heaviest things chosen ones carry in threshold seasons. The guilt of outgrowing, the grief of becoming someone that the people you love the most cannot fully recognize anymore, the exhaustion of explaining yourself to people who are not yet on the journey with you. And I want to say this directly: that guilt is not wisdom. The growth was not a mistake. The distance that has formed is not a sign that you did something wrong. It is a sign that something right has been happening quietly, without fanfare, in the hidden season of your formation. And the people who are meant to walk with you into what comes next will not need you to shrink back to a previous version of yourself to feel comfortable. They will meet you where you actually are. You are not required to apologize for becoming who you were always intended to be. Now, there is one more thing I need to say before I take you deeper into the posture of receiving. Some of you are afraid of the breakthrough, not in an obvious way, in a quiet, specific way that you have never been able to name out loud. You want it desperately, but at the same time, somewhere below the wanting, there is a fear of what it will require, a fear of what it will cost, a fear that if you actually step into the fullness of what is being given, you might lose something in the exchange: your privacy, your anonymity, the comfortable smallness that has also, in its own way, been a protection. I want to say something about that fear that might be the most important thing I say today. That fear is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of wisdom. The people who stepped into large assignments without any internal trembling, without any awareness of the weight, were the ones who were not ready for what arrived. Your fear is not an obstacle to the blessing. Your awareness of the weight is the very thing that proves you are prepared to carry it. A healthy fear of the significance of what you are receiving is not the enemy of the receiving. It is evidence that you have counted the cost. And counting the cost is not a failure of faith. It is the behavior of someone who intends to steward well what is about to be placed in their hands. So do not run from the fear. And do not try to manufacture courage to replace it. Simply recognize it for what it is, the sign of a prepared chosen one, standing at the edge of something real, and let it exist alongside the faith, not instead of it. Here is where I want to leave you before we move into the deepest part of this message. I want to give you a practice, not a physical one, a mental one. In the space of your mind right now, I want you to imagine your hands, not a clenched fist, not a closed grip, open hands, not reaching forward, not grasping, just open, held slightly in front of you, palms upward. That is the posture. That is what receiving looks like from the inside. And whatever you have been holding onto, the protection, the doubt, the quiet control, let it rest in those open hands for a moment rather than being gripped by them. You do not have to throw it away. Just stop clutching. Just open. Let the delivery find you in that position. Because what I am about to show you in the next part of this message is the specific framework that takes that mental posture and makes it livable, makes it something you can return to again and again, especially in the moments when the doubt loop starts and the old patterns rise. And I am going to come back to something I mentioned earlier, the neuroscience, the frequency, the specific discovery that explains why chosen ones were designed to receive in a different register than most people, and what can be done to reopen that channel fully. But I need you to understand something first. Who you are is not in question. The delivery is not in question. The only question that remains, and it is the most important one this message will answer, is what does it actually mean to receive? And why is that, of all things, the hardest practice a chosen one will ever learn? That is what we are going to answer together. And I promise you, by the time we reach the other side of this, you will understand not just the truth of what is being delivered to you, but exactly how to stand when it arrives. So let me give you the framework now, the one I have been building toward since the beginning of this message. I want to give it a name, because named things become returnable to. When the doubt loop starts, and it will, you need something you can come back to with precision, not just intention. I call this the receiving posture protocol, and it is not about a physical position or a feeling you need to manufacture. it is about 4 specific internal orientations that, together, create the conditions for receiving what is already being delivered. The first orientation is stillness without stagnation. And I need to draw a very clear line here, because these two things are often confused. Stillness is not the same as inaction. Stillness is not passivity. Stillness is the specific internal state of someone who has stopped running after what belongs to them and has shifted into the posture of receiving it. It is the difference between chasing and arriving. It is the difference between forcing and allowing. And it is one of the hardest things for a chosen one to do, because chosen ones are wired for movement. You were built to act. You were built to create. You were built to show up. And every instinct in you, when you feel the proximity of something significant, is to move toward it faster. But the receiving posture requires that you resist that instinct, not permanently, not as a life philosophy, but specifically in the moment of delivery. The blessing does not need you to run toward it. It needs you to be standing in the place where it can find you. The second orientation is expectant faith, not hopeful faith, not desperate faith, expectant faith. There is a difference. Hopeful faith says, I believe this might happen. Desperate faith says, I need this to happen, or I do not know what I will do. Expectant faith says something different. It says, this is already in motion, not because I have earned it, not because I have proven myself sufficiently, but because something was established that I cannot undo. And my position here is not that of a supplicant begging at a door, but of someone who has been invited in and simply has not walked through yet. Expectant faith acts before the visible evidence arrives. It speaks about what is coming as though it is already decided, because it is. And the specific internal shift that comes with expectant faith is a releasing of the white-knuckle grip on the outcome. You still care, you still want it, but the wanting is no longer a form of suffering. It is a form of readiness. The third orientation is open hands. I gave you a version of this in the mental practice earlier, and I want to go deeper into what it means here. Open hands are not empty hands. They are not passive hands. They are hands that have decided not to grip the last season so tightly that the new one cannot be placed into them. There is something specific that many chosen ones are still holding that is functionally closing their hands in the moment of receiving. Sometimes it is an old identity, the one built on surviving the weight that has become so familiar it feels like the real self. Sometimes it is an unforgiven offense, not in the dramatic sense, but in the quiet, low-level, continuous sense of carrying what someone did wrong to you everywhere you go, like a stone in the bottom of a bag that you have stopped noticing, but that is still adding weight. Sometimes it is a timeline, an expectation about when and how the blessing should arrive that has calcified into the only acceptable version of the story. And anything that does not match that version gets dismissed as not the thing, even when it is exactly the thing. Open hands means releasing all of that, not in a single dramatic act, in a continuous daily choice to stop clutching what is keeping you from receiving. The fourth orientation is identity first receiving. This is the one that changes everything, because here is what most people do when a blessing arrives. They evaluate it through the filter of their current circumstances. Does this make sense given where I am? Does this fit with who I have been? Can I justify this based on what I have done recently? And when the answer to any of those questions is no, they step back. They let the blessing sit at the door. They decide they are not ready. But identity first receiving starts from a different question entirely. Not, does this make sense given my circumstances? But, does this belong to who I actually am? And if the answer to that question is yes, and it is, then the circumstances are not the arbiter. Your identity is. You receive not because the situation is perfectly aligned. You receive because you are the person this was prepared for. That is what rightful means. It was written before the circumstances existed, and no circumstance can outrank what was written. Now, I want to show you what this posture looks like in the specific areas of your life that are currently in motion. Because the receiving posture is not an abstract practice, it has a practical shape in each of the 3 areas where your life is currently reorganizing. The first area is relationships. And I want to say this gently, but with clarity, because some of you are in the middle of the most disorienting social experience of your life right now, and you need a frame for it. What is shifting is the geography of your relational world. People who were central are becoming peripheral, not through conflict, necessarily, simply through the natural drift that happens when 2 lives are moving at different speeds in different directions. People who felt essential 6 months ago may now feel distant, not because the affection is gone, but because the language is different, because the things that used to be the ground of the relationship are no longer where you live. What you will feel during this shift is grief, and I want to name that without minimizing it. The grief is real. Even when you understand intellectually that this is a season of transition, the heart does not process loss through intellectual understanding. The heart processes loss through feeling it. And you are allowed to grieve the chapter that is closing, even while you recognize that what is opening is better. What not to do is this: do not reach back. Do not manufacture continuity where the natural movement has indicated completion. There is a specific impulse, especially in chosen ones who carry a deep sense of loyalty, to hold on to every relationship that ever mattered, to find a way to bring everyone into the next chapter, to refuse to acknowledge that some connections were built for a specific season and were always going to complete when that season ended. That impulse is beautiful in its intention and costly in its execution, because the energy you spend trying to hold what has completed is the energy that is not available for what is arriving. What to trust is this: the relational clearing is creating space, and into that space, people are coming who speak your language. People who do not need you to explain yourself. People who recognize you without a backstory. They may not have arrived yet in full visibility, but they are in motion. And just when you think you are most alone in this transition, the right connection will appear with a naturalness that will feel like it was always supposed to happen, because it was. The second area is purpose, and this one carries its own specific discomfort, because purpose in a threshold season does not arrive as a clear and complete map. It arrives in fragments, in impressions, in a deepening sense of direction without a legible destination. And for someone like you, someone whose calling has been pressing against the inside of your life for a long time, the partial clarity can feel more maddening than no clarity at all. You can see it well enough to know it is real, not clearly enough to execute it fully. And that gap between the knowing and the doing creates a specific kind of restlessness that can easily be mislabeled as impatience or lack of focus. What is shifting is the orientation of your calling. The things that once felt like the center are being repositioned. Some of what you thought was the main event is revealing itself as preparation for the main event, and the actual shape of what you are being called into is becoming visible in increments, not all at once, because if the full picture arrived before the foundation was laid, it would overwhelm the very capacity it was designed to use. What you will feel during this is impatience, and underneath the impatience, excitement, and underneath the excitement, a specific fear, the one I named earlier, about whether you are actually equipped for what you sense is coming. All of that is appropriate. None of it is a sign that something is wrong. It is the texture of proximity to a significant arrival. What not to do is announce what you have not yet received. There is a season for speaking and a season for building in silence, and the threshold between them is one of the most important pieces of discernment a chosen one can develop. The calling will become undeniable before it becomes public, and the people who need to know will know at exactly the right time. The premature announcement does not accelerate the arrival. It exposes the unfinished structure to winds it is not yet strong enough to withstand. What to trust is that the calling is not lost because it has not fully arrived. It is being assembled, and every piece of formation you have moved through in the waiting season was laying a specific section of the foundation that the calling requires. Nothing was wasted. The current uncertainty is not evidence of delay. It is evidence of the precision with which the assembly is being managed. The third area is provision, and this is the one where the fear tends to be loudest, because provision is visible and countable in ways that calling and relationship are not. When the money is not there, the math is undeniable. When the resources are thin, the argument for trusting is harder to make at 3 in the morning. What is shifting is the routing of your provision. The sources that sustained you in the last season may not be the sources that sustain you in the next one. And that routing change, the closing of old channels before the new ones are fully open, is the season of most acute financial anxiety for chosen ones in transition. Not because God has withdrawn from the provision, but because the provision is being redirected to a delivery address that is more specific to who you are becoming. What you will feel during this is panic, especially if the closing of the old channel has been more visible than the opening of the new one. And I am not going to tell you that the panic is unwarranted. The pressure is real. The practical reality of bills and obligations does not pause while the spiritual architecture is being reassembled. And the grace you need in this particular season is the grace to hold both truths simultaneously. The truth of the real practical pressure and the truth that rightful provision always finds its way to the rightful recipient. What not to do is grab back at the channel that is closing. There is a specific impulse when provision feels uncertain to return to what used to work, to go back to the version of yourself that the old source recognized, to make yourself smaller or more available or more willing to compromise than the current season should require just to keep the flow moving through the familiar route. Resist that impulse. The channel that is closing because it was never the permanent source. It was a provision for a previous season, and returning to it will not restore what has already moved on. What to trust is this: rightful provision is specific. It has your name on it, and it moves toward the same address as your rightful blessing, because they are not separate things. They arrive together, and the specific channel through which it comes will be more aligned with who you are and what you are doing than anything that came before it. Now, I want to take you somewhere else for a moment, because I want to show you what this posture looks like in practice, not in theory, not in aspiration, but in the life of someone who stood exactly where you are standing now. His name is not important. What matters is the specific shape of what he was carrying. 9 months before the shift, he was facing what looked like a total collapse. A major contract, the primary source of income that had sustained his work for 2 years, was cancelled without warning. Overnight. The kind of cancellation that does not just create a financial problem, but creates an identity problem. Because the work had become attached to the source, and when the source disappeared, the sense of assignment went with it. He had tried everything in the previous years. Meditation, retreats, systems that promised to activate what he already knew was inside him, and some of them touched it briefly, in flashes, but nothing held. The feeling of clarity would arrive and then fade, and he would return to the same fog. He described it later as living at 30% of his actual capacity and not being able to explain why. What he did in those 9 months was something he had never done before. He practiced strategic silence. He stopped announcing, stopped explaining, stopped seeking external confirmation for things that had not yet arrived. He went into a specific kind of inner work, quiet, daily, unglamorous, focused not on manifesting an outcome, but on restoring his capacity to receive. He later mentioned that during that period, alongside other practices, he found something that functioned like a neurological reset, something he described as neuroactive work that helped his system stop operating in the frequency of threat and start operating in the frequency of readiness. It did not fix the circumstances. It changed the orientation of his system toward what was arriving. On day 38, a company he had never contacted reached out. A six-figure contract, more than double what he had lost. Not in a different industry, not in a different calling, in the exact space where he had been faithfully working, in the exact capacity where he had been building in silence. He said afterward that the external change did not begin in the external world. It began the day he stopped running toward the answer and started standing still enough for the answer to find him. He proved himself in silence before he promoted himself in public. I want to pause here for a moment, because I want to give you something before I take you into what comes next. A practice. Not a physical one, a mental one. Something you can do right now, wherever you are. In the space of your imagination, I want you to find the room where you have been waiting. You know this room. You have been living in it. It is the interior space where the promise has lived all this time. The one you have been guarding, the one you have been tending, the one you have been afraid to fully believe in, and equally afraid to release. Find that room in your mind. Take a breath and find it. Now, I want you to notice something about how you are positioned in that room. Are you standing near the door, which is the arrival direction, or are you turned away from it, facing the wall of what has not yet happened? Are you in a posture of readiness, or are you in a posture of defense? Are your hands doing something, gripping something, managing something, preparing something, or are they simply open? You do not have to change anything dramatically right now. Just notice. Just let the awareness of your interior posture arrive without judgment. Because the most important thing you can do in the next 30 seconds is not a dramatic act of faith. It is simply this. Turn toward the door. In your mind, in the room where the promise has been living, turn toward the arrival direction. And if something feels like it releases when you do that, if something in the chest or the throat shifts slightly, that is not imagination. That is the receiving posture taking hold. Now, I told you I would come back to something, and this is the moment. Earlier in this message, I mentioned a discovery. I mentioned Dr. Robert Lake. I mentioned 34 years of neuroscience research and something called the youthful brain. And I told you it was the explanation for why chosen ones experience the waiting differently, why the gap between the person you sense you were designed to be and the person you are currently living as can feel so specifically painful. I want to give you the full picture now, because it changes the context of everything we have talked about. Here is what the research shows. At birth, chosen ones, and I mean this scientifically, not metaphorically, come into the world with a higher baseline of a specific brainwave frequency called gamma. The gamma wave is the highest frequency brainwave the human brain produces. It is the frequency associated with genius-level insight, with intuition, with the moments of sudden clarity where everything connects, with what ancient traditions called divine communication and what neuroscientists call peak cognitive states. Children naturally operate in gamma. Watch a child who has not yet been taught what is impossible, and you are watching a gamma-dominant brain in action, learning at extraordinary speed, making intuitive leaps, experiencing synchronicities as a normal feature of reality rather than an exception to it. But something happens. Something that begins around age 7 and accelerates through the education system, through institutional conditioning, through the accumulated weight of being told to be realistic and practical and to stop living in your head. Dr. Lake called it the decline effect, a systematic suppression of gamma activity that is not a natural feature of maturation. It was installed, and because chosen ones started with more gamma than average, because their baseline was higher, they feel the loss of it more acutely than other people. The gap between who they were as a child and who they have become is wider. The sense of living below their actual capacity is not a delusion. It is an accurate perception of a real neurological loss. This is the scientific dimension of what you have been sensing spiritually. the thing that feels like a frequency you once had access to and can no longer quite reach. That is not metaphor, that is measurable. It shows up on EEG readings. It was documented in studies at MIT, Harvard, Princeton, and Stanford. And it has a specific name, and it has a specific mechanism, and that mechanism can be reversed. I am going to tell you exactly how. But first, the most important thing I need to say to you in this entire message. What I am about to give you is not a conclusion to this conversation. It is a recontextualization of everything we have talked about. Because the 3 revelations I have shared with you so far, the delivery has already begun. You are not who you think you are. The posture of receiving is specific and learnable. All 3 of them point to a 4th truth that is larger than all of them combined. Here it is. Your rightful blessing does not just have your name on it. It was written into the architecture of who you are before you were born. Not as a reward, not as a prize for a performance you eventually managed to complete. As a covenant, a specific, non-negotiable, irreversible agreement between you and the source that created you, encoded into the very frequency of your being. And the waiting was never a condition of the covenant. The waiting was the preparation of the vessel. The blessing was always yours. The question was always, when will the vessel be ready to receive the full weight of what it was built to carry? I want to go back to a word, because words, in their original form, carry meanings that translations flatten, and there is a word at the center of this message that has a depth most people have never been given access to. The word is shalom. It appears in the Hebrew texts as the root of a concept that most translations render as restore or repay. And on the surface, that seems enough. God will restore what was taken. That is a comforting truth. But shalom does not mean simply to give back. In its original meaning, shalom means to be made complete, to be brought to wholeness, to be paid back not at the rate of the loss, but at the rate of what the loss cost with interest, with additional compensation for the time and the pain and the compounding weight of the carrying. A court finding a thief guilty and ordering them to return not the $100 that was taken, but $500, because the theft cost more than the 100. God is not returning what was taken from you. He is overpaying you for your suffering. He is not restoring you to the condition you were in before the waiting. He is completing you, bringing you to a fullness that the waiting itself was part of constructing. The wilderness was not just the place you survived. It was the furnace in which the specific capacity for what is coming was formed. And what is being delivered is not a catch-up payment. It is a full accounting for everything, the time, the faith, the cost, the quiet faithfulness that no one saw, with the specific additions that the duration and the depth of the waiting have generated. I hear the Father saying to you right now, and I carry this carefully, I have not forgotten a single day. I have not forgotten the night when you cried in a way that you told no one about. I have not forgotten the moment you almost stopped believing and chose not to. I have not forgotten the prayers that felt like they went nowhere. I counted every one of them. I have been building something that accounts for every one of them. And what I am releasing toward you now is not what you lost. It is what was always yours now, fully prepared, fully equipped, fully calibrated to the version of you that the waiting produced. Come into it. You were made for this. Let that stay with you for a moment. Do not rush past it. Because what I want to do now is give you the final piece of this message. The piece that connects the spiritual truth, the covenant, the shalom, the rightful blessing, with the practical reality of where you are standing right now. The specific thing that can close the gap between the gamma frequency you were born with and the one you are currently operating at. The tool that Dr. Robert Lake spent 34 years refining, and that has now reached over 18,000 people who felt exactly what you are feeling and needed exactly what you need. Here is what you need to understand about the gamma restoration. The reason meditation, yoga, and most conventional spiritual practices work slowly, when they work at all, is that they ask the brain to change itself from the inside. They require your brain to generate a frequency it has been systematically suppressed from generating, using the very neural pathways that the suppression has weakened. It is like asking someone to lift themselves off the ground by their own collar. The mechanism that would do the lifting is the same mechanism that is already compromised. Brain entrainment is different, not slightly different, categorically different. Instead of asking the brain to generate the frequency, it delivers the frequency directly to the brain through sound, through a specific combination of audio frequencies that, when heard through headphones, cause the brain to synchronize to gamma. The brain does not have to figure out how to get there. It is guided there. The EEG readings are measurable. The results are repeatable. This is not someone's theory. This is documented science from some of the most rigorous research institutions in the world. Dr. Robert Lake, neuroscientist, 34 years of research compressed this technology into a 7-minute audio track. 7 minutes. Not 40 days of meditation. Not years of practice. Not a $7,000 piece of biofeedback equipment. 7 minutes through headphones. Sit. Be still. Let the frequency do what it was designed to do. He called it the Genius Song. Now, before I tell you how to access it, I want to address something, because I know that if you have been on this journey long enough, you have encountered enough things that promise transformation and deliver disappointment that a specific thought is arriving right now. Something along the lines of, I have heard this kind of thing before. I understand that. And I want to honor the intelligence behind that skepticism. Your reluctance to be fooled again is not a character flaw. It is the sign of someone who has been paying attention. But I want to draw a clear distinction here, because this is not the same category as what you have tried before. The difference is not in the packaging or the story around it. The difference is in the mechanism. Every other thing you have tried, every practice, every method, every system asked your compromised neural pathways to generate what they have been suppressed from generating. Brain entrainment bypasses that entirely. It is not a matter of whether to believe it. It is a matter of whether the EEG data from MIT and Princeton is real. And it is. 18,366 people have experienced this. Not people who were uniquely gifted or specially prepared. People who felt exactly the way you feel, the fog, the gap, the sense of living below their actual capacity, and found, in some cases within days, that something shifted, not everything at once, not in a dramatic single moment, but a specific change in the quality of their cognition, their intuition, their sense of connection to what they describe as synchronicities. The universe speaking in a language they could suddenly understand. There is a woman I think of when I talk about this, 38 years old. She had spent years searching retreats, spiritual communities, practices she committed to fully and sincerely, looking for the thing that would create the connection she could sense was supposed to be there but never quite arrived. She purchased the Genius Song because, as she put it, there was nothing left to lose. 2 weeks later, she wrote a single word to describe what had changed. Synchronicities. Not a long explanation, not a list of miraculous outcomes. That one word. The sense that the universe had begun speaking to her in a language she finally had the ears to understand. She mentioned later that she had also been exploring a practice she called neuroactive work alongside it. But the Genius Song, she said, was where the shift began. That was the key that opened the door. And for those who want to hear from someone whose experience was more grounded in the practical, there is a man who described his brain, before, as operating at 30% of its actual capacity. 43 years of carrying the awareness of a potential that would not translate into outcomes. After 3 weeks with the Genius Song, he described the shift not as a feeling, but as a function. Decisions he had been unable to make for months arrived in a single morning with a clarity that was almost disorienting in its suddenness. The change was not in his circumstances. It was in his instrument, and when the instrument was working at the frequency it was designed to operate at, Everything else followed. Now, here is what I want you to know about how to access this, because there is something important I need to say before I tell you where to find it, and I need you to hear this carefully. There are sites that have taken the name Genius Song and attached it to audio tracks that carry no brain entrainment technology. Standard audio with a label. They look similar. They are not similar. The difference is not detectable by ear alone. It is only detectable by whether the technology that creates the specific frequency pattern is actually present in the encoding. Copies do not contain it, and copies will not do what the original was designed to do. The investment you are making is not just in a piece of audio, it is in a specific technology, a specific research lineage, the complete bonus package, and the full money-back guarantee, none of which are available through any source other than the one Dr. Lake authorized. The only place to access the genuine Genius Song with the full brain entrainment technology, the 4 additional resources, and the complete guarantee is the link in the description of this video and the pinned comment below. Not Amazon, not Spotify, not anywhere else. If you found something with that name anywhere other than those 2 specific locations, what you found is a copy. And a copy cannot restore what the original was designed to restore. The price is $39, not as a promotional number that exists to create urgency, as the specific number that Dr. Lake chose because he wanted this technology to reach the people who need it, not the people who can afford the biofeedback sessions. The biofeedback equivalent, the same technology, delivered in a clinical setting, costs $300 an hour. The equipment to access it at home costs $7,000. The retreats that attempt to create gamma-adjacent states through intensive meditation can run hundreds per day with no guarantee of neurological effect. $39 is not a sale price. It is a mission price, and it includes the core track, the Genius Child audio for anyone in your life who is younger and whose gamma you want to protect before the decline effect takes hold, the classic book that was the actual foundation for what later became The Secret, the guided visualization that walks you through 4 specific areas of your life, and the infographic summary of the 5 most impactful habits that prepare you to sustain what the Genius Song activates. Every one of those resources has standalone value. Together, they represent a complete system, and the entire system carries a 100% money-back guarantee, not a conditional one, not a window you have to catch in the first 7 days. If you experience the Genius Song fully and feel no shift, you can return it. The risk of trying is 0. The only risk is in not trying, because that is another day operating below the frequency you were born with. Go to the description, find the link, follow it at your own pace. But do not let the doubt loop convince you to wait for a better moment. There is no better moment than the one in which you are already open. The link is there for you. The delivery is already in motion. What you do next is your part of the protocol. So here is where we are. You came into this message carrying something, and you are still here, which tells me that what you came carrying was not just a question or a curiosity. It was something real, a weight that needed a frame, a knowing that needed language, a faith that needed to be met with something solid enough to hold. Let me tell you what happened in the time we have spent together. You came in carrying the weight of faithful waiting, and what I gave you was the frame that the waiting was never passive, it was formative, not as a consolation, as a structural truth. The specific shape of your wilderness was the precise preparation required for the specific weight of what is being delivered. You came in wondering whether the signs you were experiencing were problems to solve. And what I showed you was that they were indicators of movement. The restlessness, the change tolerance, the dreams, the confirmations, the unnamed grief, the quiet knowing, not symptoms of imbalance, signals of arrival. You came in with an identity that had been shaped more by the waiting than by the truth of who you actually are. And what I placed in front of you was the full description: seer, receiver, cycle breaker, light bearer, wounded healer. not as aspirational titles, as the accurate language for what was established about you before the waiting began. You came in carrying the 3 patterns that block a chosen one from receiving the grip of control, the familiarity of the doubt loop, the quiet functional unworthiness that masquerades as humility. And I named them not to shame them, but to disarm them. Because a pattern that is named is a pattern that can be interrupted. You came in carrying guilt about your own growth, grief about the chapters that have been closing, and a fear of the breakthrough that has been as present as the desire for it. And what I said to you is this: the guilt was not earned, the grief was appropriate, and the fear is not an obstacle. It is the evidence of a prepared person who intends to steward well what is about to be received. And then I showed you what the delivery has been building toward. The shalom, not restoration, but completion. Not a return to what was, but an overpayment for what the waiting cost. A covenant that was never conditional on your performance, that was written before the circumstances existed, that is moving toward you right now with a precision and a specificity that could only be described as intentional. You came in as someone who has been waiting, and I want to release you as someone who has been prepared. Now, I want to give you something to do with what you have received today. And again, I mean this as a mental practice, not a physical demand. You do not have to move or write or perform anything visible. I want you to find, in the space of your mind, the version of you that is standing on the other side of this threshold. Not an idealized version, not a perfect version, but the version that received what was being delivered, the version that stepped through the door that was always meant to open for them. Find that person in your imagination. Notice what they look like. Notice what they are doing. Notice what they are carrying, or more specifically, what they are not carrying anymore. The weight that is gone. The posture that is different. The specific quality of light around someone who has arrived somewhere they always knew they were going. Now notice this. That person is looking back at you, at this moment, at this message, at this specific point in the journey where you are standing right now. And what do you see on their face? I will tell you what I see. Relief, not surprise. Relief. Because they always knew it was real. And the only thing between the you that exists right now and the you that is looking back is the distance between this moment and the moment you fully decide. Not as a mental exercise, not as a spiritual performance, but as a genuine interior agreement that what has been prepared for you is real, that it has your name on it, and that you are the person it was made for. That agreement is available to you right now. Let me give you the words. You do not have to repeat them out loud. Just let them move through you and see what shifts. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that waited. You are allowed to step into a season that makes your past almost unrecognizable. You are allowed to receive without having earned it in this exact moment. You are allowed to be the first in your lineage to walk into this. You are allowed to let God complete what God started without managing the delivery. You are allowed to stop calculating whether you deserve this and simply open the door. And you are allowed fully, without condition, without qualification, to believe that what is coming is real. Now I want to seal what was spoken today, not with a list, with a declaration, because there are 5 things that are true about you that I want to say out loud before I release you, and I want you to receive each one of them, not as encouragement, but as description. You are a seer, and what you are about to step into will require exactly the perception that the waiting was sharpening in you. The things you have sensed that you could not yet see will become visible, and when they do, you will know how to receive them, because you spent years learning to trust what you felt before you could prove it. You are a receiver, and the capacity you carry for what is large is not arrogance. It is the correct measure of what is actually yours. The fullness you have been reaching for is not an exaggeration of your worth. It is an accurate description of the size of the delivery. You are a cycle breaker, and what enters your hands in this season will not stop with you. It will move through your lineage, your community, the people whose lives touch yours, in ways that extend far beyond what you can currently see. The blessing was always larger than just you. You were the point of entry. You are a light bearer, and the illumination that comes with what is being delivered will not require you to perform it or announce it. It will simply be present wherever you are. People will not always be able to name what they encountered in the room you were standing in, but they will know something was different, something was real. And you are a wounded healer, and every single thing you carried that you wish you had, not every specific pain, every particular loss, every exact shape of the grief you accumulated in the waiting, is being transmuted, not erased. Transmuted, turned into the medicine that only you can carry. And the people who need what only your specific story can produce are already being moved toward you. You are chosen, you are equipped, you are being delivered to right now, at this very moment. Now I want to give you a moment, an actual moment of stillness, not rushing to the next thing. In your mind, I want you to stand at the threshold, not inside what is coming yet, not still in the room of what has been, right at the edge, at the exact point where one season is releasing and another is beginning. You can feel both from where you are standing, the weight of what is behind you, the pull of what is in front. And in this moment, in this exact interior location, I want you to notice something. The door in front of you is already open. It was not locked. It was not sealed. The work of the waiting was not about reaching the door. It was about becoming someone who would walk through it, rather than stand outside it indefinitely. And you have done that work. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And that genuineness is the only credential that was ever required. Feel the threshold under your feet. Feel the shift between what is behind and what is ahead. And take one breath, not a dramatic one, just a real one, and let that breath be the movement across the line. Let it be the moment, interior but real, where you stop standing at the edge of your own story and step into the chapter that was written with your name as the protagonist. This is the moment, this specific breath, this specific choice to stop managing the arrival and simply receive it. I hear the Father saying to you, and I mean this with everything I have, I hear him saying, "My child, I saw every moment you held on, when you had every reason to let go. I saw the nights when the faith was thin and the silence was loud. I did not look away. I was building. I am always building. And what I have built for you carries your name, not your neighbor's name, not the name of the person whose timeline you compared yours to, yours. The delivery has begun. You will recognize it when it arrives, because I designed it specifically for the person you have become. And that person, the one forged in the waiting, the one who stayed when leaving would have been easier, the one who is standing at this threshold right now, that is the person I had in mind when I began. Receive it. You were made for this. And what comes next, the season you are stepping into, I have heard it described as a destiny's embrace. That particular feeling of arriving at something you always knew was yours, but could never quite reach from where you were standing. The recognition not just of the blessing, but of the belonging. The deep, low-frequency certainty that this is right, that this is yours, that this is the place the whole journey was moving toward. That is where you are going. And the path between here and there is shorter than it has ever been. I want to close by saying one more thing, and it is the simplest thing I have said all day. Go and receive, not in a performance, not as a project. Simply go, with open hands and a turned posture, back into the life that is waiting to give you what belongs to you. The delivery is already in motion. The door is already open. The name on the package is yours. You are the chosen one. And what is rightfully yours is already on its way to the only address it was ever intended for. Chosen, delivered to, received. Chosen one. Something has been living underneath the surface of your life that you have never had the right words for. It was there when you kept going in the season that gave you no reason to. It was there in the decisions you made when no one was watching, the quiet ones, the costly ones, the ones you made in the dark and never got credit for. It was there when the voices told you it was over and you chose, one more time, not to believe them. You called it stubbornness. You called it survival. You called it not knowing what else to do. God called it something else. He called it the signature of his strongest warrior. This is not a message for everyone who is chosen. It is for those chosen at a specific level, the ones assigned the longest wilderness, the hardest opposition, the heaviest silence, because the ancient principle has never changed. The depth of the preparation is always proportional to the height of the assignment. And you, chosen one, have been in one of the deepest preparations I have ever been given words for. The prophecy is not a future event. It is your past. It is your present. It is the thread running through every survived storm, every refused surrender, every morning you chose to rise when the night had taken everything it could reach. What was spoken over you before your first breath is confirmed today. Not because you finally earned it, because you always were it. Something brought you to this moment that has nothing to do with chance. A force older than time arranged this specific meeting between what you have been carrying and what is about to be spoken. And I need you to stay until the end of this message, because by the time we finish, you will walk away with 5 things. The evidence that the prophecy written over your life is already real and already active. The name for the specific strength you have been demonstrating without knowing it. A practical tool you can use today to begin reading your own life differently. A declaration spoken directly over you that will change how you see every hard chapter you have ever walked through. And the full weight of your warrior identity spoken clearly, without apology, for the first time. Do not leave early. What is coming matters. Now, let me ask you something. Have you been tired in a way that sleep does not fix? Not physical exhaustion, though that is part of it. The deeper kind, the kind that lives in the bones. The kind where you wake up and the first thing you feel before the day even begins is the weight of everything you are still carrying. You have slept, you have rested, and still it is there. If that is familiar, I want you to understand something. That is not a symptom of weakness. That is a specific sign, and it is the first of several I want to name today. Because the strongest chosen carry a fatigue that ordinary explanations cannot account for, and until you understand what it actually is, it will continue to feel like a problem when it is actually evidence. The first sign is this bone-deep tiredness that rests are powerless to resolve. It is the tiredness of someone who has been carrying something at altitude, a weight that has spiritual mass, not just emotional weight. Your nervous system has been running at a frequency of sustained alertness for longer than it was designed to sustain that without relief. Not because something is wrong with you, because something significant is moving through you. The second sign is that you have changed in your tolerance. Things that used to be manageable environments, conversations, certain dynamics in relationships have become genuinely draining in a way that feels almost physical. You used to be able to stay in the room. Now, something in you refuses. You find yourself pulling away from noise that once felt normal, from people who once felt comfortable, from places that once felt like home. And you have probably questioned whether that pulling away is a sign of growth or a sign of damage. It is growth. Specifically, it is the growth of a soul that has been refined to the point where it can no longer tolerate frequencies that are out of alignment with where it is going. The fact that certain things now repel you is not evidence of a problem. It is evidence of a calibration. The third sign is the dreams. They have become more vivid, more specific. Sometimes they feel less like dreams and more like visitations, scenes that carry a weight when you wake up that lingers longer than dreams should. Sometimes a knowing of something you cannot fully articulate. You wake up from these dreams already tired, as if you were working while you slept. And you were. The fourth sign is the numbers, the patterns, The moments when something arrives at exactly the right time. A word, a song, a conversation you overhear, and something inside you recognizes it before your mind can explain the recognition. These are not coincidences. These are the language of alignment. These are the universe confirming in the vocabulary of pattern that the frequency you are operating on is being noticed. The fifth sign is this. In the middle of the hardest moments after the storm, at the bottom of the darkest season, there have been brief, inexplicable moments of peace. Moments that had no logical reason to exist, given the circumstances. Moments where something settled inside you, not because the problem was resolved, but because something deeper than the problem was present with you. That peace was not random. That peace was the signature of the one who knew exactly where you were and was already in the room before you arrived. All 5 of those signs. They are not symptoms of a life going wrong. They are the diagnostic pattern of the strongest chosen entering the final preparation before the fulfillment begins. Now let me say what most people will never say out loud about you. Nobody saw it. Nobody saw the prayers you sent out at 2 in the morning that never got a public record. Nobody saw the moment you chose not to say the thing you had every right to say. Nobody saw the decision you made in silence, the one that cost you something real, that no one thanked you for, that most people in your circle did not even know required a decision. Nobody saw the version of you that kept moving when the last visible reason to keep moving had been removed. Nobody saw the strength it took to appear functional in rooms where you were quietly carrying something that would have broken most people in those same rooms. Nobody gave you credit for the war you were fighting, not because they were cruel, because they could not see the battlefield. But here is what is true about an unseen battle. The one who wins it does not need a witness, because the victory is not stored in the memory of the people who were watching. It is stored in the architecture of who you became through the winning. Every private battle you won without applause built something in you that the applauded ones do not have. You have been constructing something in the hidden places, a depth, a groundedness, a capacity for pressure that cannot be manufactured in the comfortable seasons. It can only be built in exactly the kind of season you have been in. And this is where most people stop understanding their own story. They look at the length of the hard season and they conclude, something must be wrong. They look at the weight of what they are carrying and they conclude, I must not be doing this right. They look at the silence from heaven and they conclude, I must have been forgotten. None of those conclusions are correct, but I understand why they form. Because when you are inside the process, you cannot see the product. When you are in the middle of the wilderness looks like it has no purpose. It looks like lost time. It looks like punishment. But here is what the wilderness actually is for the strongest chosen. And I need you to hear this fully before we go any further, because this is the reframe that changes everything. Your wilderness was not a detour from the preparation. It was the preparation. There is a specific kind of character that cannot be formed in comfort, specific capacities that cannot be built in seasons of ease. There are things that had to be carved out of you, false versions of yourself, dependencies that would have become your undoing at a higher level, needs for validation that would have corrupted the assignment, that could only be removed through the exact kind of sustained pressure you have been in. The wilderness was not punishing you, it was purifying you. And there is a pattern across every person who was ever called at the level you are called that makes this undeniable. David was anointed by Samuel in the middle of his father's field, not the palace, the field. He was recognized by God while he was invisible to everyone else in the room, including his own father, who did not even bother to call him in when the prophet arrived. And then, after the anointing, David did not go to a throne. He went back to the field, back to the sheep, back to the invisible season. The anointing happened first. The preparation continued for years after it. And in those years in the field, in the wilderness between the promise and its fulfillment, David learned something that no palace could have taught him. He learned who he was when no one was watching. He learned to fight in the small battles, so that when the giant arrived, his hands already knew what to do. You have been in the field. You have been learning what your hands know how to do in the hidden place. And you are closer to the giant than you think. Now there is something else I want to come back to later in this message. Something that science, specifically neuroscience, has recently begun to map about the minds of people who carry what you carry. About the specific way the strongest are wired, and what happens to that wiring under sustained pressure. I am going to explain it fully when we reach the right moment. But hold that thought, because it connects to everything we are building together, and it will become important. Right now, there is something deeper I need you to understand about your formation. The first thing your wilderness was doing was building your character in ways that cannot be fast-tracked. Patience that is not passive. The specific kind of patience that is active, engaged, and refuses to lose its orientation toward the destination, even when the destination is invisible. You are also developing a discernment that only comes through sustained proximity to difficulty, the ability to read situations, people, and environments accurately without needing them to announce themselves. You cannot learn to read a storm from a photograph. You learn to read it by being in enough of them that your body begins to recognize the pressure before the sky changes. The second thing your wilderness was doing is this. It was clearing your environment. Relationships that looked like they were leaving you were actually being moved, not by accident, by arrangement. The people who could not go where you are going were being repositioned before the final season began, so that when you step into the fullness of your assignment, you are not carrying the weight of connections that would have pulled you back to the altitude you already left. This is one of the most painful parts of the formation of the strongest chosen, because the clearing does not feel like a blessing when it is happening. It feels like loss. It feels like abandonment. It feels like the proof of some failure in you that you cannot identify. But what was actually happening in those departures? Every relationship that ended, every friendship that faded, every door that closed on a community you thought you would be in forever was a strategic preparation for arrival. The space that was created was not left empty, it was made ready. The third thing your wilderness was doing is the most important one. It was the only context in which the assignment could be fully revealed to you, because there are dimensions of your calling that cannot be heard in the noise. There are aspects of your purpose that require the kind of silence that only the wilderness produces. The silence where everything that is not essential has been stripped away, and what remains is the clearest possible signal of what you were actually made for. You know things now that you did not know before this season. Not information, knowing. The deep kind, the kind that lives below your thoughts and does not require regular maintenance to remain true. That knowing was built in the wilderness, and it is one of the most valuable things you own. Now here is where we are going next, and I need you to stay with me, because what I am about to unfold over the next part of this message is the piece that most people who are in your situation have never been given. We have talked about what the wilderness was doing, but we have not yet talked about why you specifically, why the particular intensity, the particular duration, the particular level of testing you have experienced makes perfect sense once you understand the principle at the center of it. This principle is ancient. It is consistent across every great story that has ever been told. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it in your own life. Stay with me, because the reason you were given the hardest assignment is exactly the same reason the most important warriors in history were given theirs. And when that reason becomes clear, and it is about to, it will change everything about how you read what has happened to you. The principle is this: the strongest warriors receive the hardest assignments, not as punishment, not as randomness, as the divine mathematics of capacity. God does not assign what he does not trust. He does not send into a territory what he does not know can hold the ground. And when he looks at the full scope of what needs to be accomplished in your family line, in your generation, in the specific territory you were placed in, and he surveys all the souls available for that assignment, he does not choose the untested one. He chooses the one that has been proven. You have been in the proving, and the length of your proving is not evidence of a mistake. It is a measurement of the magnitude of the assignment. Think about what this means when you look at the pattern across history. Joseph did not go from the favor of his father directly to the palace. He went from the favor of his father to the pit, then to slavery, then to false accusation, then to prison, and then only after every layer of ego, dependency, and need for human validation had been stripped away, then to the palace. Not in spite of the pit, because of it. Because the person who emerged from that sequence was someone that the comfortable Joseph never could have been. The pit did not delay the destiny. The pit was the preparation for the level of the destiny. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. 40 years. After being raised in the most powerful court in the known world, after having access to every resource and education available to a person of his era, he spent 40 years shepherding sheep in the desert. To the outside eye, that looks like the story of a man who fell from significance into obscurity. But the 40 years in the wilderness were not the interruption of Moses becoming who God needed him to be. The 40 years were the making of it. Pharaoh's court made him capable. The wilderness made him ready. And then there is Gideon. Gideon, when the angel found him, was hiding. He was threshing wheat inside a winepress, which is an absurd place to thresh wheat, because you thresh wheat in the open air where the wind can carry away the chaff. But Gideon was terrified of the enemy. He was doing everything wrong, in the wrong place, because fear had reduced him to hiding. And the angel looked at this frightened man hiding in a hole and called him a mighty warrior. Not what he was performing. What he already was, that the circumstances had not yet had the opportunity to reveal. The angel did not say, "One day you will become a mighty warrior." The angel said, "You are a mighty warrior. Right now, in this hiding place, before a single battle has been fought, because the calling was already present. The assignment was already real. The strength was already built. It just had not been deployed yet. Chosen one. That is your story right now. You are not becoming the strongest chosen. You already are. The formation is not still in progress. It has been in progress for years, and what it has built in you is already present, already real, waiting to be deployed. Let me show you something in the original language that will make this concrete. There is a word in ancient Hebrew, gibor. It appears in one of the most striking verses in the entire text of the ancient scriptures, in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 17. The verse says, "The Lord your God is in your midst, a gibor who gives victory." Most translations render gibor as simply mighty, but that flattens something important. Gibor in its original context does not just mean strong. Gibor refers specifically to the elite warriors, the champions, the ones who are called for the assignments that ordinary soldiers cannot complete. In the ancient armies of the time, the gibor were not simply the largest or the most experienced. They were the ones trusted with the assignments where the stakes were highest and the margin for error was zero. And here, in Zephaniah, God calls himself the gibor, the champion warrior in your midst. Now hear what that means for you. When God places his spirit inside the strongest chosen, when he positions himself as the gibor in the midst of your life, he is not just offering you encouragement. He is transferring his warrior nature into the soil of your assignment. It is as if the commanding general of the most powerful force in existence gave you his personal seal and said, "Wherever you go, my full authority and strength go with you, not eventually. Now, in this season, in this wilderness, before the deployment is visible, you are not just chosen, you are gibor chosen." Now I want to give you something practical, because the knowledge of what you are is only part of what the strongest chosen need. The other part is knowing how to operate in alignment with it. And there is a specific practice that the warriors who have held their ground through the longest battles all have in common. I call it the warrior's stillness protocol. Here is what it is. In the middle of the noise, the voices, the opinions, the urgency of circumstances that are demanding your reaction. There is a practice of creating what I would call an interior pause. Not a physical pause, not silence in the room, though that helps. An interior pause, a deliberate moment in which you stop processing the external signal and you locate the frequency underneath it. The place that is not reactive, the place that knows without being told, the place that, if you are honest, has never actually been confused about the direction, only about the timing. The warrior's stillness protocol is not about having no thoughts. It is about learning to identify which thoughts are originating from your calling and which are originating from your condition. A warrior who cannot distinguish between the voice of strategy and the voice of fear will exhaust themselves fighting battles that were never theirs to fight. But a warrior who has learned to find the frequency underneath the noise, who has trained themselves to pause before reacting, to locate the interior signal before responding to the external one, that warrior does not waste strength. They conserve it for what matters. Here is how you practice it right now, wherever you are. Inside your awareness, not out loud, not in a way that requires anything from your body. I want you to locate the quietest layer of yourself, not the thoughts, underneath the thoughts. The place that is watching the thoughts rather than being caught inside them. That place is already still. It is already oriented. It does not need more information. It is already pointing in the direction of the assignment. Let yourself rest in that place for a moment. Not because it solves anything immediately, because the more often you return to that frequency, the more naturally your decisions will emerge from it, rather than from the noise. That is the warrior's stillness protocol. Simple, portable, and it is what distinguishes the strongest chosen who burn out from the ones who finish. There is someone I want to tell you about. I am not going to use her name, because what she walked through is sacred, and what matters is the shape of her story, not her identity. She had spent more than a decade pouring everything she had into other people's growth. Every day she showed up and gave, and privately, she described her own mind as a machine running at 30% of its actual capacity. Ideas that should have come easily required effort that exhausted her. Decisions that should have been clear sat unmade for months. She knew she was called to something larger than she was currently living. She could feel the gap between who she was built to be and who she was managing to express. But the gap felt impossible to close, and she did not know why. She was not lazy. She was not faithless. She was not unqualified. She was a strongest chosen whose native frequency had been gradually suppressed by the accumulated weight of years of giving without restoration, by a world that had consistently demanded from her without ever returning what her particular wiring required. 3 weeks after she began a specific daily practice of frequency restoration, something we are going to talk about in detail shortly, something rooted in the neuroscience of what happens to the give-or wiring under sustained pressure. She described what happened in her own words. She said, "The ideas started arriving on their own. Decisions I had been postponing for a year became obvious in a single morning. Something that had been muffled inside me found its voice again." She called it not transformation, but remembering. What she remembered was not new information. It was herself, the version of herself that had been present before the suppression began. The wiring that had always been there, that had simply been running below its own native frequency for too long. I will explain exactly what happened in her brain and what it means for you when we reach that section of this message. Because what she experienced is not unique to her, it is the pattern, and it is available to you. But before we get there, there is a revelation I need to build with you first. A revelation that sits at the center of your story. One that will change how you read every hard chapter of your life that came before this moment. And here is where everything changes. Everything I have been building with you, every sign you recognized, every formation principle that reframed your wilderness, every historical parallel that showed you the pattern, all of it was leading to this moment. Because there is a revelation that sits at the center of your story, chosen one, and until it lands, nothing else fully makes sense. I need you to stay with me right here, because what I am about to say is not encouragement. It is not something designed to make you feel better in the moment and then fade by morning. What I am about to say is something that, when you truly receive it, will change how you read every hard chapter of your life that came before this one. You remember what we talked about earlier, the principle that the strongest warriors receive the hardest assignments, not as punishment, not as randomness, but as the divine mathematics of capacity. You remember that David was not found in a palace. He was found in a field, carrying the smell of sheep and the invisible weight of an anointing he had not yet been given a stage to prove. You remember that Gideon was hiding when the angel found him, threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the enemy, and the angel called him a mighty warrior before he had won a single battle. You remember that Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, doing what looked like nothing, while everything that mattered was being built inside him. You remember all of that, and I told you that pattern was true for you, but here is what I did not tell you yet. I did not tell you why. Why you? Why this level? Why the longest? Why the hardest? Why the kind of trial that felt like it had no proportion to what any reasonable person should have to carry? The answer is not what the enemy told you. It is not that you are cursed. It is not that you did something wrong. It is not that God turned away. The answer is something so much older and so much more certain than any of those lies. And I hear the Father saying something over you right now. These are the words being placed on my heart for you, chosen one, and I ask you to receive them not just with your mind, but with the part of you that has been waiting the longest to hear something true. He is saying, I did not give you the hardest battle because I was punishing you. I gave it to you because when I looked across every soul I formed, every life I breathed into being, every assignment I laid out before the foundation of the world, you were the one I trusted to carry it. Not because you are without weakness, not because you never wanted to quit, not because you never broke in the private places where no one saw, but because in every single one of those moments, you chose again and again not to let the breaking be the end. And that is not ordinary, my child. What you have been doing in the dark has been extraordinary, and I see it, every single moment of it. I have never looked away. That is the word. Not for everyone. For the one who has been in the longest fight and still has not walked away. Take a moment with that, because that is not poetry. That is the theological truth of how the strongest chosen are deployed. God does not make errors in assignment. He does not accidentally send a fragile soldier into an advanced war. He studies the soul. He knows the capacity. He knows not just what you can survive, but what you can become through the surviving. And when he looked at everything that needed to be accomplished in your specific territory, your family line, your community, your generation, the people who are waiting on the other side of your breakthrough, he did not say, send the comfortable one. He said, send my strongest. That is you. And now I want to show you something about how the strongest actually operate, because there is a misunderstanding about strength that has been costing you more than you know. There is a bird that was designed for something that looks impossible. It rides currents of air that are invisible to the naked eye, thermal columns rising from the earth, warm air that creates invisible highways, thousands of feet above the ground. And the way this bird travels those distances is not by working harder than other birds. It is not by flapping more frantically, not by expending more energy, not by brute forcing its way through headwinds. It finds the current, it locks in, and then it stops flapping. It rises without effort, not because it is lazy, because it learns something that most birds never do, that the most powerful thing it can do is stop fighting the air and start reading it. Chosen one, you have been flapping for a long time, in ways that no one around you could see or understand, carrying weight vertically, fighting resistance horizontally, exhausting yourself in every direction at once, because no one taught you that the strongest warrior's most powerful weapon is not their effort, it is their alignment. The eagle on the thermal is not passive. It is not defeated. It is not weak. It is operating from a level of intelligence that transcends raw power. It has learned to let the invisible current do what raw wing strength never could. There is an invisible current running through your life right now. It has been there this entire time, even in the seasons when you could not feel it. Especially in the seasons when you could not feel it. And what is shifting in this season, chosen one, is not the circumstances around you, it is your awareness of the current. The direction of the wind has not changed. What is changing is your capacity to stop fighting it and start riding it. That is not weakness. That is mastery. That is what the strongest chosen are being called into right now. But before we can fully step into that, before the eagle can lock into the thermal, there is something that has to be named. Something that lives inside the strongest ones that, if it goes unnamed, will pull them back to the ground every single time. I need to talk about the inner war, not the opposition outside of you, not the people who misunderstood you, not the doors that closed, not the circumstances that felt like betrayal. Those were real. I am not dismissing them. But the battle that has done the most damage, the war that has quietly been going on the longest, is the one that happens in the moments after the external storm quiets down. It is the voice that says, "What if I am not actually strong enough for this?" Not a loud voice, not dramatic. It comes in the quiet. It comes after the breakthrough almost happened and then didn't. It comes after the season of genuine faith and then a silence from heaven that stretched longer than felt fair. It comes in the middle of the night when the performance of okayness falls away and something underneath asks the question you have been afraid to answer directly. What if I am not who God thinks I am? What if the assignment is too large? What if I reach the moment it requires everything and I discover I do not have it? What if the people who will depend on me for something important arrive and I look like a fraud? What if being seen, truly seen, at the level that this calling requires, reveals something that confirms the worst thing I have ever believed about myself? I want to name that fear, chosen one. Not to shame it, not to dismiss it, to honor it. Because that fear is not a sign that you are unready. That fear is a sign of something most people miss entirely. It is a sign of wisdom. The ones who crashed, the ones who received a level of assignment and then burned it down through recklessness or ego, they did not have that fear. They had no awareness of the weight because they did not actually understand what they were carrying. They walked into the fire thinking it was a stage, and they performed rather than fought. And when the real thing arrived, they had nothing to give it. Your fear is different. Your fear knows the weight. Your fear understands that what is coming matters. Your fear is the part of you that takes the assignment seriously enough to be afraid of failing it. That is not the voice of your weakness. That is the voice of your wisdom. And here is what wisdom says next. The fact that you are this aware of the weight is the exact reason you will not collapse under it. The healthy fear of a warrior is not the absence of readiness. It is the presence of it. You are more ready than you feel. Now, there is something else that runs alongside that fear. Something that the strongest chosen carry that most people never talk about because it sounds like it should not be a problem. But it is, and it is one of the heaviest things you have been carrying in silence. It is the guilt of outgrowing. You have pulled away from people you used to be close to, not because you stopped caring, but because the conversations started to feel like they were pulling you backward into a version of yourself. You have already become too large to fit inside. You have become unavailable in ways that you cannot fully explain, not because you are selfish, but because something in you has been protecting what God is building. You have set limits in places where you used to have none, and every time you did, there was a voice, sometimes yours, sometimes theirs, that said, "Who do you think you are?" That guilt sits heavy. It makes you question whether the growth is real or whether you are just running from something. It makes you wonder if protection is just another word for abandonment, wearing better clothes. I want to say something to you about that. Outgrowing is not betrayal. Distance is not rejection. Silence is not cruelty. And the unavailability you have been protecting, The quiet that you built around what God is doing in you was not selfishness. It was stewardship. You are allowed to outgrow people. You are allowed to outgrow places. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that kept everyone comfortable at the cost of your calling. You are allowed to protect what God is building in you, even when you cannot explain it to the people who feel the distance. You are allowed to become unavailable to everything that was never aligned with your assignment, not in cruelty, but in clarity. You are allowed to be powerful. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to step fully into what you were made to be, without apologizing, without shrinking, without performing smallness to make the room feel safer. And you do not owe anyone an explanation for answering the call that was placed on your life before anyone else had an opinion about it. Now I want you to do something with me, not with your body, with the part of you that is listening underneath the noise of your thoughts. Somewhere inside you, there is a version of yourself that has been waiting for permission, not permission from me, not permission from the people who will benefit from your breakthrough. Permission from the deepest, quietest, most honest part of yourself. Right now, in the interior of your own awareness, let that version of yourself step forward, not into the room, into the center of your attention. See yourself as someone who has already received the permission, not someone asking for it, someone who is now standing inside it. Let the guilt release, not because you forced it, but because you finally gave yourself the thing you have been giving everyone else the right to take up space. If something is shifting inside you right now, drop one word in the comments, just one word that names what is releasing, because what you name, you can release, and what you release, you can walk away from. Now, I want to speak to the transformation that is already in motion. Because you did not come into this season the same as you were going in, I want to name what changed. I want to name it specifically because the strongest chosen have a tendency to minimize their own transformation, to look at what they became and still see only what it cost rather than what it built. You went in needing someone to tell you that you were enough. You are coming out knowing that the right word was never enough. The right word was always appointed. You went in fighting for people to recognize your value. You are coming out walking with an authority that does not require a room's permission to be real. You went in carrying the weight of other people's doubt about your future. You are coming out carrying only what is yours to carry and nothing that was never meant for your hands. You went in asking if the prophecy was real. You are coming out as the living proof that it always was. That is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of the answer, and we are not finished yet. Because everything we have walked through together, every layer, every reframe, every declaration has been building toward something. Toward a revelation so specific, so complete, so total in its implications for your life, that once you receive it, you will not be able to look at your past the same way again. You have been misreading your own life. Not because you are wrong, not because your pain was not real or your confusion was not valid, but because the story you have been living has been larger than the frame you had available to hold it. And when you try to fit something that large into a frame that small, things that are essential look like they do not belong. Things that were purposeful look like they were accidental. Things that were the most important chapters look like they were the cruelest ones. I want to give you the right frame. What if the wilderness was not a detour? What if it was the curriculum? What if the isolation was not abandonment, but incubation, the specific conditions required to develop something that could not have been built in public, surrounded by noise, under the pressure of an audience? What if every door that closed was not a denial, but a redirection, not because you were unqualified, but because the place that door led to was not the place your assignment required? What if the betrayals, the losses, the seasons of silence from heaven, what if all of it was not happening to you, but for you? And the only reason you could not see that was because you were inside the story, and you cannot read the title of a book from inside the pages. Here is the revelation that changes everything. Chosen one. The prophecy is not a future event you have been waiting for. The prophecy is your life. Not the life you wanted to be living, not the life you thought you were promised. The exact life you have actually lived with, every scar, every survived storm, every night that felt like it might be the last night you could hold on, every morning you chose to rise anyway. That life, that is the prophecy in motion. Every time you did not break when the breaking would have been easier, that was a verse. Every time you chose to believe when every visible circumstance said stop, that was a fulfillment. Every time you got back up, not because you felt strong, not because the path became clear, but because somewhere underneath the exhaustion there was something that refused to be extinguished. That was the prophecy writing itself in the only ink that means anything. The ink of a life actually lived. And that was not by accident. And that was not by mistake. And that was not in vain. Every chapter you thought was wasted has been working. Every season you thought was silence has been speaking in a frequency you were not yet equipped to hear. Every detour that felt like failure was a deeper road to the exact destination. This is not encouragement, this is evidence. Now, I want to give you a tool, a specific practice that the strongest chosen can use, not tomorrow, not when things feel clearer right now, in this moment, from wherever you are. I call it the prophecy audit. And here is how it works. Inside your own mind, not on paper, not out loud, not in a way that requires you to move or prepare. I want you to bring forward 3 things. 3 specific hard things you survived. Not the hardest things you can imagine. The hardest things you actually walked through. The real ones. The ones that cost something you could not get back. Bring them forward in your awareness. Let them be present. Now look at who you became on the other side of each one. Not who you wished you had become. Not the version of yourself you think you should have been. The version that actually emerged. The specific ways you are different, stronger, clearer, more discerning, less willing to accept things that were never worthy of your time because of exactly that pain, in exactly that sequence, at exactly that cost. Now ask yourself this: could you be who you are right now without those 3 things? Not a version of you, the version that is here, listening, with this specific level of depth and endurance and capacity for something larger. Could that person exist without those specific chapters? The answer is no. And that is not a tragedy. That is the architecture of a calling. What you just did is the prophecy audit. And what you found there is not evidence of what was done to you. It is evidence of what was built in you. It is evidence that a prophecy has been quietly and faithfully and completely fulfilling itself in the exact life you have been living. Now,